Hello and welcome to episode number 131 of Killer POV. I'm your co-host Rob G from Blumhouse.com. Sitting with me with a copy of Stone Cold on Blu-ray.
Yeah, baby.
Is Elric Kane.
And Big Trouble in Little China, the comic book.
Which I just
lent
you.
It's a good combo.
Yeah,
and a Guinness in my hand. Thank you, Adam Lima.
Adam Lima, thank you for providing the Guinness.
Yes.
Next week, if you bring us that Jamaican beer, what's that called? Red Stripe? I will tattoo your face on my face.
What?
That is a hell of a promise.
They'll have to bring a lot of it. And we'll do it right after.
Elric Kane, Red Stripe fan.
Red
also
Stripe.
And apparently face tattoo fan.
Red Stripe man.
And also with us is Rebekah McKendry, editor-in-chief of Blumhouse.com.
What up? I am like stupid pregnant.
Almost didn't make it.
Very almost.
Yeah,
Almost.
I
This
know.
is it.
I'm supposed to be on bed rest right now, people, but I was like going stir crazy and needed to get out of the house.
She's going to see how long she can last. She
Yeah.
wasn't. We were going to call or Skype her in, which we didn't really want to do, but we were hoping that we wanted her to be a part of the show somehow. But she braved.
I'm wearing sweatpants,
boredom
guys. This is where it's
came here
at.
for
I'm
it.
wearing sweatpants right now.
If you guys are gambling people out there, you might want to gamble when this baby's going to drop.
Dead Right Horror Trivia is most of the people there were guessing February 10th is
Mm-hmm.
the going time. Our actual due date is the 17th, and then like the it has to come out now is like the 24th.
I see.
So
What happens during the show though? That's
You're not going to
gonna
be late.
I don't know. I was like 2 weeks late with Marnie.
Yeah, but look at you.
I know. I'm huge and miserable.
The lid
Oh,
is huge.
Reg.
The lid is huge now.
No, I am.
Have a beer. They'll speed things up.
Be
No,
polite,
it's
Elric,
sad
be
that
polite.
like I've been Googling like how to go into labor because there's like certain things that they say to do, like eat spicy foods, and most of them are just old wives' tales. But I'm like, I'll fucking try anything now. I'm just kind of sick of being pregnant. So yeah, on with the show.
Oh no, there's a restaurant where there's a in LA. This is actually something I have heard about. It's kind of cool, and there's like a menu, and it's a really basic. Nick Simon went there when they were pregnant, where people go and they eat there, and then the next day they have their baby, and it's like a place that's known for it, where a lot of people flock
I'm going
to.
to message Nick
Yeah,
Simon
he knows
and get
'cause they
this
went.
like tidbit of LA
Oh,
info.
and it was the first I'd heard of it, but it's actually a thing. Like it's kind of like one of those blessed waters or whatever. Weird shit like that.
I don't buy the blessed waters, but if it's like 911 wings, I'll fucking do it.
Yeah.
Listen, Elric, you're getting too Hollywood on me, and anytime you get Hollywood, quote, that makes this a second-rate podcast, end quote.
Hey, I'm not the one who talks about training little chihuahuas.
Seriously, dude, that's what she's known for. We talk about her. I'm going to talk about
Believe
that.
it or not, it's a job, all right,
It's a job. People
Somebody
do that
does
here.
it.
As we are
She
unpaid.
probably makes more than we do, guys.
I kind of like being an underdog. I think we are a second-rate podcast. I think it's better. It's better for us to be a second-rate. I don't want to be a top tier.
The movie crypt beats us every time.
Yeah,
so there we
so
go.
exactly.
We are second-rate, at least here at
exactly.
Geek Nation.
We should
so.
be second-rate.
But anyway, so let's get to the horrors, not
That's
our
the spirit,
real
guys. Come on.
not our real lives. Let's get to the horrors that we like
I
to
actually
watch.
think we're second-rate people. If I'm perfectly honest, I think we're pieces of shit. But with free beer,
But with free beer.
so we're all right. Don't worry, the kid will be better, Becca. The kid will be better.
You need to raise better people, both of you.
I'll work on that.
I know I'm terrible. That's why I'm not going to have children.
Yeah. I'm good at faking it.
So,
Okay, guys. So what did we watch this week?
well, speaking of terrible,
Oh yeah, you did that.
Oh, no. What'd you
no,
watch?
it's not. You know what? Here's the thing: we watch so many movies at this point, and as part of our job, trying to write about horror movies. Here's the thing: I can look at my shelf and try to come up with a couple ideas, but I think people don't realize the sheer volume of content that Becca and I and our writers have to create on
3
a
articles
weekly,
a day.
2 to 3 a
2
day.
to 3 a day.
That means you have to come up with 15 ideas all week long, and they can't be just 2-second things. So I'm always looking for inspiration, which means I always squeeze in more horror movies than usual because it's like, let me watch stuff because that usually gets my ideas, flowing, like, giving respect to the dog from The Hills Have Eyes, which I'll get to
That
in
was a
second.
great article.
Thank you. So I watched 4 movies in a row this weekend, and I was mildly entertained. All 4 of them kind of angered me because none of them were awesome. And like after a while, you're like, I just want to watch something awesome. Like I'll sit through 4 okay movies if one
Even
of
though
them's
Stolen
awesome.
Cold is sitting right here, which is awesome.
And I did watch
I thought
it.
you
That
watched
was
Turbo Kid.
I did. I'll get to that.
Okay.
That's the
I
saving
was going to say,
grace.
don't you put that in mid-range.
No, we're starting terrible and moving on. So, all right. So let me preface that. So, all right. Hellions It's on. Is it on Netflix? Yeah, that's
It's
the way I
on-
watch. No.
It's on Amazon.
It's on Amazon, and Scream Factory is putting out the Blu-ray of it as
From
part
the
of
director
their
of Pontypool.
director of Pontypool.
Which got me excited,
And
but I've heard mixed reviews.
It's here's the thing about Hellions, and I'm sorry if you listen to us, director of Hellions.
Bruce
but
McDonald.
I'm sure
doesn't-
you're a
Bruce
lovely
McDonald.
person.
He's older. He's
it's so frustrating how there's such a good movie there, and then it just doesn't. It goes in a different direction that I don't want it to go. I think the first 20-25 minutes is some of the most promising horror movie ever. It's like it takes place on Halloween night. This very young girl who's like 17 finds out she's pregnant, doesn't know how to break the news to her mom. Her mom takes her little brother out trick-or-treating, and then there's a bunch of kind of creepy kids dressed up that keep kind of playing pranks on her. And right there, just from the first 20 minutes, love the premise, love the setup, love all that stuff, love the look of the kids. It just feels like, oh, this is going to be a classic Halloween movie. I can't wait to watch this every year. And then for some reason, at like the 30-minute mark to the end, it's just I can't even tell you what happens. I hate when filmmakers say like, oh, it goes into dream logic or whatever, because that's just an excuse for your movie not to make any more sense.
Well, I'd actually go further than that. I'd say reviewers and audience can call something a dream logic, but if you made a movie, you can't use those words.
Well,
you know what I mean?
And that's definitely what it is,
sense.
because without rhyme or reason, at like the 30-minute mark, it's nighttime, it's Halloween night, and all of a sudden the entire movie turns purple. Like, I'm not even kidding. The lighting scheme is purple, and I'm like, and I kept trying to think to myself, like, why are they doing this? Did they shoot all this stuff at day and they're trying to?
No,
see
I mean,
it
it
on
was
different
clearly purposeful, but it was a real mistake, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a clear. Oh, have you seen it too?
Wow.
Yeah, I reviewed it back right after
wow.
Christmas.
Oh, right,
Oh,
right.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
right.
yeah.
And I really didn't like it because I just think it took a major. It felt like, it's not often. I like art house and indie stuff. It's not often where I see something where I go, oh, this guy could have benefited from notes, could have benefited from having to go through a production model. Instead, he just could do whatever he wanted. He thought, oh, let's go in a total avant-garde way in the second half. And you just don't care at all. You just don't care.
Wow.
And it's so, again, frustrating because I really like the first half. I like the characters. I like that they're new faces. Like, I like the young girl. I like the girl who played her mom. And
The creepy kids had a lot of potential.
Yeah, just all of it had potential, and then it just becomes a movie I don't care about anymore.
Yeah.
And it's really frustrating. So I wish it was better. I'm sorry. Then I watched The Veil, which I did an interview with the director, Phil Junot, on Blumhouse earlier this week. Listen, Phil directed 3 O'Clock High. He gets a pass for life in my book because of that, because 3 O'Clock High is one of my favorite movies of all time. This movie's okay. It's not what... It's kind of... You know what it is? It's like if The Sacrament didn't just come out, like a year ago, because it's a very Jim Jones-esque... It's the Jim Jones story, but with a guy named Jim Jacobs, played by Thomas Jane, who makes very broad decisions in his performance, with a somewhat supernatural angle to it. So that's the slight twist to it. But again, it's like, man, I don't know how many more of these cult movies I have to sit through. If I had not seen The Sacrament or...
Is there a supernatural part to it or just pure cult? Okay.
No, there's definitely that aspect. And of course it's framed around Jessica Alba is like this, I don't know if she's a news reporter or documentarian or whatever, but she takes the one survivor back to the grounds where it all took place. And it's kind of like doing a documentary on the whole thing. So there's another thing that I'm sick and tired of. It's like all
Isn't
the
that why
elements.
Faults was so cool? Because Faults was the weird part of those stories you've never seen.
Yeah.
It's about somebody who breaks it, and then it's just like, then a survivor. It's just so different.
Yeah, that's why I love that
Yeah.
one. It was like everything I wanted in a cult movie without being a cult movie.
Yeah, it's
the reason I didn't like Christie.
Holy Smoke, if you guys liked Faults, Holy Smoke by Jane Campion is also really great. It's Harvey Keitel as a cult breaker. He gets Kate Winslet out of this cult, and it kind of starts there, and then it's them trying to do the breaking process, and it's actually like a really funny, very strange movie.
Wasn't it like a sort of sequel to another Harvey Keitel movie? I'm trying to think.
That his character might have been a continuation. It could be, and maybe I don't know.
Well,
but it's fun.
The Veil's on Netflix Instant now, so if you want to check it out, I mean, there's interesting things in it, and I think it's worth checking out if you're not sick of, the documentarian trying to make a movie about something that happened, or kind of a loose version of a true crime thing yet again.
It's funny because the day it came out on Facebook, Jim Hemphill, who does a lot of the, writes for a lot of these magazines, so he called Thomas Jane's performance like the best of the year. And then I went on Twitter like a few minutes later, and the next thing I read is worst performance of the year, Thomas Jane in The Veil, from someone else, and both people I kind of like. So it was kind
it's
of
polarizing.
So I was like, okay, and when it's Thomas Jane, I go with the one who probably said not as good, unless it's Boogie Nights. He's great in Boogie Nights. But.
Hey man, he was a good Punisher, just not a good Punisher movie.
No.
So that's those two, and then Hills Have Eyes 1 and 2. I did a double feature.
The originals.
The originals.
Yes.
Number 2.
You know what? I'm going to say something controversial.
It is going to be.
man.
If you say what I think you're going to say, it is called.
I like 2 a little bit better than 1.
At least one's gross. 2 is just like boring.
No,
I didn't think 2's boring.
I didn't find it. Well, here's the thing. I've been set up. It's got a 0 rating on Rotten Tomatoes. 0. I looked it up to make sure. I have been set up for the worst movie ever made. I have been set up with, there's doggy flashbacks. It's the stupidest thing ever.
There's dog flashbacks.
And there is. It's
remember
amazing.
those.
That's
Oh
why,
my God.
That's why Beast gets my respect, because he remembers.
You need to do an in defense of The Hills Have Eyes.
I may at some point. But no, I mean, it's not good. I'm just saying that I like it a little better than the original. And I don't really... I love Wes Craven. He is one of my favorite horror filmmakers. I'm not crazy about Last House on the Left or Hills Have Eyes, his first 2. I understand their place in his filmography and the importance of them and what they do.
Horror
but they're
filmography, definitely for Last House.
Not necessarily. But that's the thing. It's like, but if you've seen, The Virgin Spring, it's like, but that's the masterpiece version of that movie.
Well, you're talking story, though. I'm talking like power, impact on people who watch movies. Right? Suddenly you watch this movie that's like breaks all the taboos and makes you feel bad and wrong. I mean, it's just an interesting movie. It's not a revisit happily movie.
No,
but
but
it's an important movie.
I watch Virgin Spring and I go, well, that was pretty and that's sad. And then I watch Last House on the Left and I'm like, there's no hope, no God, nothing. I don't even know why I continue.
Thing out there,
Yeah.
No, it's pretty rough. And I honestly feel the same way about Hills Have Eyes. Unfortunately, the Blu-ray looks awful. I think Anchor Bay put it out. So that was another thing, is like it doesn't look. It looks just as good as I guess any other previous version. I like things about it, but I don't really like it that much. And then I just popped in part 2 right away. And this is like my 4th movie in a row where I'm like, God, is anything going to be good? The only thing about 2 is not a good movie, but I was more entertained by it. Like I was mildly entertained by the dog flashbacks. And
that is entertaining.
I've never laughed hard. Like I'm serious. I almost had to pause. I've never laughed harder than there's a moment where Michael Berryman gets bitten by the dog in the first one. So in the second one, he's terrified of Beast. So there's a moment where he's on top of Ruby, and Ruby's like, "You better watch out, because you know who else is here? Beast the dog." And literally he like, that mangy money ain't sneaking up on me. And not even 2 seconds later, the dog sneaks up on him and like tackles him.
Called it
and has a flashback.
And I've never laughed so hard. I was like, oh my God. So,
now, what was the story? Because I watched it not long ago too, and really I hadn't seen it before, really didn't like it. But I read right after it. What was the story? Wes didn't want to do it, and then he had ran out of money.
Yeah,
and he had to finish it for some reason.
Something about Nightmare. Yeah, he reluctantly didn't want to do it, and he kind of wrote it off himself.
Yeah.
Well, if you read the article that we posted today called "The House That Freddy Built," where it goes through and details kind of the business of Wes Craven's films and how they did and where he was financially at each one, and how much of a struggle it was for him to get Freddy made, and how like destitute he was trying to get Freddy made. It talks briefly about why he had to do that.
Yeah, and
one.
he didn't get a piece of Nightmare. Which is that's the awful thing, is that becomes a huge hit, and it's like he still has to finish.
There's a reason he directed every Scream movie, kids.
He
wasn't letting go of anything. Yeah,
but no, I just thought it was funny, and also the Blu-ray of it. Again, no rhyme or reason that it should look as good as it does, but it does. It's actually a pretty good presentation, and I thought it was funny that what's his name, Harry Manfredini does the score, so it feels like a cheap, bad Friday the 13th sequel. It's like there's no way around it. It just feels like it. And you're like, what am I watching? What
I'm just
is
glad
this?
you didn't invite me for that double feature.
But if it's the type of movie that if I was 12 and it was on HBO all the time, I would have fond memories of it, and probably because of the dog.
Yeah,
honestly. So there's that, and I'll get back to my good one after we go through some of yours.
Awesome. I'll jump in.
Yeah,
do it.
So I have to start by saying X-Files, the one from this week, the third episode. Oh my God, it reminded me, it was like being like 1995 again and watching and going, oh my God, this is why I fucking love X-Files.
It's far more playful.
I thought it was one of the best episodes they've ever done. Yeah. I really loved it. It was so much fun.
I was only a little distracted because of the casting. I mean, just a little, because he's just so that character from Flight of the Conchords.
Well,
it's Murray,
But all the other characters were people who had appeared in the other 2 episodes. Like the 2 people who were huffing paint at the beginning were the couple who were huffing paint in the cockroach episode.
Oh, wow.
And so yeah, like the whole time I'm watching it, kid, I was like, I know them. And I was like playing on IMDb the whole time. And so most of like the characters that played characters were in other X-Files episodes from way back.
But
which I thought
it actually
was
does
wonderful.
point to a major problem the show had, that the movies had, which was this over seriousness that killed any joy. And then the first 2 episodes were really just that again. And then the third one goes, and it knocks it out of the park where you're like, oh yeah, I don't need to see, like, you can get serious if the storyline is a more scary episode. But really, this kind of, the comical timing is a lot stronger with these guys now. And they've also become better actors, so they can actually pull this off better. Like, her getting all sexy in the flashback was hilarious. It was like brilliant, you know?
Yeah, there's one clip that somebody's been sharing where essentially Mulder's having a conversation with Scully in this episode, but Mulder does all the talking. It's like 5 minutes. He's like, and I know what you're going to say, Scully, and it's this and blah, blah, blah. And then just at the end of this whole diatribe, she's like, that's the Mulder I miss. Something like that. And like, that's what we as the audience are all thinking.
It's communicating.
It was just wonderful. So I'm excited to see what it does now, just because this one
But they were out of order, right?
So
it might not have even been the third.
No, that was always intended to be the third.
Okay.
That I know. I think they bumped episode 5 to 2. And 3 was the same, so I think the next few are going to be a little out of order.
And then it's only 6, right?
It's only 6 total, so...
Wow.
And now there's also Millennium reduced talk out there now, probably because of this.
Kind of crazy.
Oh, wow.
I'd rather just see Lance come into that. I mean, imagine if he replaced Skinner.
Lance would just be more fun in this.
I would just have him replace Skinner and have it Lance and those two and just make it kind of bizarre. It'd be fun.
Yeah.
So this week, I also rewatched Goosebumps, which I had seen end of last year, and it was on my top 10 list from last year, but Elric texted me and Rob this week and was like, hey, this Goosebumps is a pretty good movie. And then I'm on the other end going,
was not shit.
I fucking told you this like months ago. And you guys laughed at me for having it on my top 10
I
list.
didn't laugh.
You didn't. Elric did.
I did.
Elric did.
Yeah, you're ridiculous.
I'm waiting for the 3D version of it so I can watch it at home in 3D.
It's a fun movie. And I was
fun.
even rewatching it. I was like, yeah, this is just
It's really cute.
Just a fun little movie.
It's still like when you compare it to some of the ones from when we were kids, Monster
Squad?
Monster Mash, but yeah, Monster Squad. It's the difference is like the CG effects are not bad in Goosebumps. Like it kind of works for it. But like when you have a Wolfman and you have things like that, you could have just had them practical, and then when you do the big things, gone CG. And I do think it makes that little bit of a difference to how you kind of relate to the movie. So when I'm watching them, like the CG is better than most of those kind of movies. But you're like, yeah, but I think if it had had a few things peppered in, I might have loved it. But I did like it a lot. I think Jack Black's really fun, and I'm not a Goosebumps guy. Like I know you're a big, you've read it when you're a kid. I didn't really. I knew what it was, and so. But it was a fun play that if you let loose all these stories, they kind of take over. And,
I've tended. Yeah, I mean, I'm looking for. It was a little bit after my time, but I'm looking forward to it. And also, I know this is a cheesy excuse, but a lot of times 3D stuff. I've noticed when you watch 3D at home, the CG stuff is more forgiving in that form. I can't explain it. It's
in
just
3D?
In 3D.
It makes sense.
It all makes sense. It almost it works better that way. So
was that released in theaters?
Yeah,
in 3D?
totally.
Yeah,
Totally.
because the first time I saw it in theaters in 3D, and this time I just rented it off Amazon, and it feels more cartoonish in 2D.
So that's a big part of it. Is a lot of these films that have overtness in the CG. Sometimes it's because they're making them for 3D, and then when you flatten it out to a 2D movie, it doesn't look as good or as impressive because you're like, oh, that's obviously a CG effect. So I don't know, that's part of it. What else did you see?
I saw, and this was going along with Rob and I had to watch some of the Blumhouse releases that got pushed to Netflix this week. So I watched Visions, which was directed by Kevin Grutert. I'm probably saying his last name incorrectly.
He was the director of the last Saw ones? Or?
Yeah, he did the last 2 Saws.
6 and 7.
And he did Jezebel, which I liked.
Right.
Isn't he working with one of our friends? Mr. Rivet?
Oh, maybe.
I don't know.
I don't know if that's what it is.
I know he also is like he's done a lot of editing. Like he edited like The Collection and things like, or The Collector, one of the Collector movies.
I think he did both of them.
So yeah, he's done a lot of horror editing, and he edited this one too. I really liked Visions. I was kind of, when I read the write-up, it was like a pregnant woman starts seeing ghosts.
That's why.
And that's why I picked this one. When we were in the staff meeting, I was like, pregnant woman, I'll take it. But it's about a pregnant woman and her husband who buy a vineyard, and as soon as they get there, she starts seeing things and like ghosts and stuff, and everybody's like, oh, it's just because you're pregnant, here, have some antipsychotics. But it's actually like the cinematography in it is gorgeous because it's this gorgeous vineyard, and it's kind of coming into season while she's getting bigger, but the twist at the end, I was not expecting, I have to say. It's a really good twist. I won't.
They make wine.
That is not the twist.
What's wrong with the movie?
It is very small. I will say that. It is, most of the movie is two people in a vineyard.
No, I'm just always wondering. I'm always curious. Like, I mean, not that you have some insight, but I'm always curious when the decision, say you have your slate of which ones to kind of dump onto Netflix, because it's not always because they're bad. Because sometimes there'll be something really interesting that gets put out there.
I don't know. I think that's an interesting term you used, the word dump. I mean, was it really dumped, or these were all what quote micro budget movies?
Yeah, everything here was made for like $1 million or under, I would assume.
Yeah, so these are intended to be slightly smaller movies. So to me, it's like, the smart model today is like, well, all right, this is a small movie. Most people watch stuff on Netflix these days. Would it be smarter to put X amount of millions of dollars to get it in a few screens?
Right.
Or what if we just release all three?
Well, plus also we don't know what the deal that Netflix is giving. So,
exactly.
So if Netflix is paying good money, just like Redbox actually paid good money, people don't realize, like, to those crappy horror titles you see on there, that's how they get their budgets.
And that's the thing is
back,
that's how people make money off making movies these days.
But I mean, this one is getting attention on Netflix, so its mission is accomplished because every week I do like 5 hot flicks on Netflix on Blumhouse. And I put this on my list for this week, and all of the comments underneath the Facebook post were like, oh yeah, Visions is great. Love the twist at the end. I wasn't expecting that, things like that. So I think, this is how I always use Taking of Deborah Logan as an example, this movie that no one had ever heard of. It got pushed onto Netflix, and then while on Netflix, or even The Last Shift would fall into this too, where it just explodes, and then suddenly everybody's like, holy shit, have you seen this movie? It's on Netflix.
I think The Canal also was one that, like, did a lot better once it was on there.
This one I definitely want to check out for sure.
Yeah, I recommend it. I will say that through most of it, I was kind of going, I've seen this before, because it is pregnant woman getting visions of ghosts, and you're like, okay, it's a haunted house movie. But then when you finally find out what's going on in like the last 20 minutes, you're like, wow, I have not seen this before. Interesting plot twist.
So the ghost baby was having fun.
It was all the ghost baby. And then the last one I saw, which I think we all did, Turbo Kid.
Yes, I'm gonna talk about that in a minute. But Elric,
I'm still behind on that.
Before we get to, you didn't see it? We were gonna try to see
I know.
one
Well,
movie all
I
together.
screwed up earlier when I was meant to see it, and the link didn't work like months ago. For a festival, so I feel bad.
Do you understand that Dennis Atherton is losing his mind right now that you didn't see this movie?
I rewatched it.
And also that somebody I know was the New Zealand producer of a Canadian movie, right? Ant also did that one.
Yeah.
No, I've heard nothing but good things. I'm very excited. I keep being behind.
What did you see then before we get to that one?
Okay, so I saw Goosebumps, same as you, which I did enjoy. So we do our film discoveries. I have to give my list to Brian every year. Every year I find that horror film where there was angst. One year.
Brian Sauer from Rupert Pupkins.
I've got to give him my list. This film I had only found out about 5 weeks ago. This title, I started reading about it, really wanted to see it, but when I get a bee in my bonnet and then can't find it, it was a code red
title. Did you
title.
Seriously just fucking say bee in your bonnet?
I did say bee in bonnet, but I said it more masculinely than you did. You did, Preggers, making me sound all effeminate. So I had a bee in my bonnet, and you know how that gets, Rob.
I do. Oh my god.
And anyway, I the code red title, Soul Survivor. And I came across, just like I constantly champion possession or things like that, Chris Alexander from used to a magazine called Fangoria and Shock Toy. A lot of the times he writes ridiculous things and he's insane, and tries to stand up for movies that are just ridiculous.
I love that man.
All true.
But he put
all true, but I love that.
But he put Under the Skin on a cover of Fangoria, and I'll always respect him for that.
Right.
But he had this thing. He kind of was writing like from his passion piece about this title, and I looked at the picture, and I was like, oh, I kind of recognize that image. And then I looked it up on Code Red, and it had been sold out for years. Like it's one of these titles probably not coming back. Went online, it's like $50 everywhere. Kind of waited a while, then I really wanted to see it, and then found one for like I got my B and I found one for like $25 on Amazon. I think you might be able to find ones for around that or $40. This is the best money. This is going to be my number one like discovery of the year. And when I say discovery, I mean I saw it. Doesn't mean I discovered it. Total thanks to Chris on this one. It is. I mean, we need David Robert Mitchell on the show now because this movie, and we can also talk to the Final Destination boys. This movie is definitely a movie that it follows. Had definitely replicated some of this in a good way, and then the same with
When's
Final.
It from?
It's from I think like '84. It's by Tom Eberhardt, who directed Night of the Comet right after the next year.
Wow.
Nothing like Night of the Comet. It's like it's going for total. It's a scary very chilly atmosphere. Very much like it's literally very much in terms of atmosphere like It Follows. It's not quite as successful as It Follows in terms of the way they walk towards you, and It Follows. That's one of the big changes. But now that said, it also harks back to this kind of movie that I'm starting to really realize is my favorite kind of movie, which is Messiah of Evil and Carnival of Souls. Very Carnival of Souls.
Dare I say Dream Logic?
No, it's not. No, not the plot. It's actually very. I mean, the way the creepiness, the way they look, and the way they kind of come for you. But basically, and the accusations are usually thrown towards Final Destination on this one. A lot of people will. Even people have said that this guy could look legal. I don't believe that. I think I wouldn't be surprised if Jeff Reddick or one of the writers had seen it, and I think they went in a much more original and kind of big way. So I think. It's where you take an idea. It's not copying it. But I will say there's definitely really interesting threads from this movie to both It Follows and Final Destination, because basically a psychic, an actress who has a psychic flash that this woman she's meant to work with the next week is going to die in this plane crash and he's going to live. He's going to be the only survivor of a plane crash. And then she tries to warn her, isn't allowed to warn her, and then the plane crash happens. The woman survives, and then basically the woman starts seeing basically kind of dead people looking at her and kind of coming menacingly towards her. So the idea is that, and then a couple things happen a la Final Destination where something kind of happens on its own, but not much. I think it's only one time. Otherwise, it's actual people who have recently deceased. So they have to have died. They just start kind of coming towards you. Exactly like It Follows, with super creepy music, fantastic music. And this is when you discover these, it's got a couple clunky scenes of drama stuff, or there's one bad comedy scene in the middle. But in general, it's 80% on the level of those same movies. Wow. And it's not ever going to get a normal release, which is just crazy. And Tom Eberhardt apparently has really just not talked. He's 68. He did Without a Clue. He did Captain Ron. He went on to do some pretty big movies.
Captain
Ron, baby. Kurt Russell.
Okay. No, I've seen it.
He hasn't really talked about it, and the producer, there was a tiny extra on the Code Red DVD. One of the producers said they spent $350, didn't make a single dollar, got ripped off by the thing, but that Tom's direct first cut of it was about a few minutes longer and was just a better movie, and then the distributors just cut it arbitrarily. So that could be why the director, I'm not kidding when I say literally now my number one goal is to get this guy on our show, because also Night of the Comet's a masterpiece too. But you know what, I mean, maybe Chris has probably tried to. The liner note said he never has talked about this movie. It is really fucking fantastic, I've got to say, and I'm not someone who will ever, to me, it's like Final Destination. It follows, even if they'd seen and just taken even a strand where they took it to, they made their own unique, brilliant movies. But there's something about this movie that I think it does deserve some credit in there. And you guys will really enjoy watching it. It's
okay. I'm sold.
Fantastic. I mean, I've got a copy, so you guys can watch mine. But in terms of listeners, it's Code Red. Or I'll write to Code Red Bill on Twitter and find out if there's any chance they're gonna do more of them. But thanks to Chris Alexander for that one, because I really sometimes somebody champions something and you're like, but there was enough code words in there with Chris's taste. I was like, okay, maybe I'll dig that one, and it's really neat. But it's just the way it looks and feels. There's just certain moments where you're like, oh, this is exactly the kind of movie I love. But it's a bummer when they, I will say this: doing the show now for 120 episodes,
31.
It's always just as I go, there can't be anything. There'll be some okay movies, but there can't be any movies you're gonna love still that you haven't at least heard of.
There's always one.
And every few months, I'd say there's probably one.
Yeah.
I just got a list from Kino today of some of the stuff that they're releasing, and I realized I've never seen The Black Sleep before, and I'm suddenly kind of excited to see that one.
No, you're right. At some of these random. I mean, look, I hadn't seen Blood Rage either, and Blood Rage was total fun. It's not it's not like the kind of movie I want to make, but it was just a lot of fun. Yeah. But yeah, Soul Survivor is SOLE, not soul as in your soul, Survivor. And so, definitely look it up. And if anyone listening knows Tom Eberhardt in any way, please, seriously, let us know, because I would love to talk to him. I think he lives in L.A.
Right.
Wow.
Cool, man. What? Anything else?
No, that was it. Those are the movies. I watched a lot of Westerns, so I don't, as a Western.
I've been watching Westerns too.
Yeah.
But before we bring our guest on, let's close it out. Here's a movie that people have been telling me, or in particular, one person that listens to the show has been pushing us to watch it. And Dennis, I love you, but when anyone pushes me to watch anything, that usually deters me from watching.
Yeah,
it.
Rob's
it really bothers me.
Rob's like
when
this
people-
guy that if you say like you should really listen to this band, he's gonna be like, well, other people are listening to this band. I don't know if I will.
I'm a DIY punk like that, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway, so no, it popped up on Netflix Instant finally, and I've heard so much stuff about it. And you know what? The other thing was I watched a little, right before the movie came out, and I actually hate that I know this is part of the publicity machine, but like there was like a little clip that went online, and I watched it, and like completely out of context without watching the trailer and knowing what the hell the movie is, you watch the clip and you're like, what the hell is this? I don't get it. So that was my only, what I brought into the movie. But once I started it, I'll say I reluctantly for 20 or 30 minutes just kept saying to myself, this is all right. This is all right. Well, I guess it's pretty good, actually. It's actually really, really good. But no, it's just all right. And then, I don't know, 45, 30, 50 minutes, I was completely in love. And I'm like, God damn it, this is really, really good. And the reason being is because, so it takes place in a post-apocalyptic 97.
See, have you seen the short? I think the reason I'm delaying is because I saw the short
never saw the
ABCs
short.
of Death short that it was based on.
Yeah.
No, I didn't.
Which was good, but...
Yeah, I didn't even know that. But no, the feature, so anytime that anybody tries ambitiously to make a quote-unquote 80s style thing, like I immediately turned off, because I'm like, you just can't capture that. Somehow this captures the heart and spirit of that stuff, that it does feel like a movie that could have been made in that time period.
Little BMX Bandits or something?
BMX Bandits.
It's totally BMX
It gets
Bandits,
really, really gory, too. There's a lot of fun stuff in it, a lot of good characters. And
It's got the Ironside, right?
Ironside's great in it. And there's a
It's
lot
got
of
like a
fun.
love
All right.
story behind
promise,
it too.
I
Love
promise
story,
by next week I'll
a
watch
lot
it.
of twists and an amazing score. I was so angry because, of course, me being the vinyl junkie that I am, was like, all right, I have to buy the score. And of course, it came out from Mondo and Death Waltz like 5 months ago and is totally sold out, impossible to get. So I'm stupidly going to pay a lot of money to get
What
it.
kind of score was it? A synth?
It feels like an early 80s synth score.
Yeah. Cool.
It's so great. But a lot of fun. It's on Netflix now. Definitely just check it out. It's just a fun movie.
I'm down.
And that's what I like.
Yeah.
So, alrighty. Well, we will...
The modern king of anthology
The king of
segments.
anthologies.
He's made 2 of my favorite anthology segments coming up next.
Okay, we are back with our very special guest. Bekah hightailed it out of here, I think.
Yeah.
Was this it? Was she giving birth right now or no? Or is the pool still open?
It's a big faker.
She's a big faker. She had to run it. In fact, we told this guest that she
just hates her work.
Yeah, exactly. That's why she left.
Yeah.
And she's not here to defend herself, so we could do that.
And he's dying inside a little right now.
No, I welcome it. Let's hash it out.
Yeah.
On her behalf.
So we're very excited to welcome to the show Mr. David Bruckner. Hello.
Hey.
Welcome, man.
Yeah.
Coming
it's
off, I
good to be
believe,
here.
a premiere. Not
Yeah.
premiere, but a screening last night, right?
Yeah, kind of sort of a special screening last night for Southbound. Yeah, so
Southbound,
the
which
actual
is-
premiere is Friday.
Friday, and is it out Friday as well?
It's out in several cities on Friday, and then VOD on the 9th.
Okay, so as you're listening to this, because this airs on Fridays, you can go see it in a few cities, and then VOD is coming. And Elric, I haven't had a chance to see it, but you saw the movie.
Yeah, I
yes?
saw it at AFI, and I was sitting next to Crazy screaming at you guys and the Q&A lady.
Oh, wow.
And I have it all on tape. My friend who I was with filmed the whole thing. It's like this. Basically,
What
a woman
happened?
afterwards gets up, and I think Roxanne Benjamin was on stage, and she said, "What's the point of this empty solo? Like, what is the point?" I can't remember what it was about the violence, but she really she was crazy. But it was pretty entertaining to watch. And it's kind of perfect to end a horror film with somebody just kind of lashing out against you being empty and soulless. But I think the audience quite liked it. I don't say this because you're on the show, but I've said it about VHS because when I saw VHS, I felt like your part of that was so special to me because I love cinema that surprises me. So when I was watching it and then certain things happen, even just the way you orchestrated things and that, it was surprising. But in this film, it's quite different. And again, your piece is like, imagine the best episode of ER. And then imagine it if it was actually fucking amazing and hypnotic and horrifying. That's what his segment is.
Wow.
And we're not going to talk spoilers, but the interesting thing about this movie are the little connections between the stories. Like obviously yours is directly connected to Roxanne, and which I enjoyed as well. Like very different, stylized, and but I really think it's making a segment of a movie. You couldn't have done a better job. It's like you kind of it's completely hypnotic.
Wow.
You know, what's going on?
Look at that.
Bye.
Oh, good. I'm glad you liked it. I'm out. I'll see you.
But it's really great, and it's interesting that because there's a long period between those two films.
So explain to me and to the audience that hasn't seen it. So it's an anthology. How many stories is it? 3 or 4?
It's 5 tales, maybe 4, depending on how you look at it. It's a little mysterious in that way. It's several tales of, I like to say, roadside horror that take place along the length of a haunted highway. So anything can kind of happen. And, we wanted to chart different intersecting travelers. And, the idea is that on this highway, you will kind of come upon what you need to come upon or what you got coming to.
Who decided on the idea of the intersections? Like who was writing the intersections? Was it the 2 filmmakers who would be intersecting, or was it whoever would do the next part?
When I came on board, Roxanne and Radio Silence and Brad Miska had already been working on it, and Radio Silence had this concept for zipper transition. So it was like, the way they described it was, you'd be finishing one short film, and there'd be a dog that ran through the film or had something to do with it, and then the camera would just follow the dog straight into the next short, and we would go from there. And then I think, it was a neat idea at the time, and they had a really cool way that could sort of link to important sections throughout the piece. And then as we all just kind of jumped in that and started exploring it, we started asking, what if there were, greater implications to that crossover? What if we shared characters? What if they existed kind of in the same world?
Which is partly why you care more, and I don't want to give any spoilers on yours, but because yours is related to a character from a previous story rather than just a random, I think you benefit because you've had time to care already. The problem with like a lot of anthologies, even say VHS, right, is you only have your 20-minute cycle to draw from. And I think yours is it's like a really good synthesis. Right?
Yeah, and it's also, also like normal anthology, you just got to start over every few minutes, know, and it's like, I always say it's like when you turn the page to a new, chapter in a book and you got to meet new characters, there's just a little piece inside your heart that goes, okay, I'm bored for a second. I have to reinvest myself. Yeah. And, for a movie, we just wanted this thing to chug along and the idea that you could have a prior investment in a segment or ask a question in a segment, and then, the next piece would actually pay off the answer, which I think Patrick Horvath's, Jailbreak does that, coming off of mine, and answers some questions about what's going on there. So, I think just as far as like, getting in the mix of some kind of genre alchemy, like it just felt like a really fun way to mess with expectations and do new stuff. So.
I just realized, I want to go back to the beginning at some point, but it's kind of funny now that I think of it, is that a lot of your films are intertwined with other filmmakers in the sense that, all right, so this is Southbound, before this VHS, before that The Signal. How is Southbound different from those experiences? I think on The Signal it was more that it was a full-on collaboration between the three, you and the 2 other directors.
Yeah, totally. Signal was definitely like we were all in the room every step of the way, trying to create one story ultimately with 3 different perspectives. Like it was closer to Rashomon, and but there was this kind of handing off of the baton, the same idea of where do I leave it and where do you begin, and does the audience know that? Do they know that a different storyteller is coming in, and is that part of the fun for them? Can we include them in that idea? Signal was crazy because we just didn't. It was such a learning experience for me because Jacob Gentry and Dan Bush, who are 2 of my best friends, and we continue to consult each other on everything's movies. But we had no idea how wildly different our tonal sensibilities would necessarily come across. And one of the things I learned throughout that process was that you can be sitting there talking to somebody about what you mean and about what a story is going to do and how it's going to feel, and you can seem to be in complete agreement, and then you get on set and you're going, God, that's a weird angle, or Gentry standing over my shoulder going, that's a really boring way to shoot that, and I'm going, yeah, but it's matter-of-fact violence, that's scary, and Whose
was the dark comedy one?
That was Gentry,
the middle one.
Yeah, because I remember when
he did the first half hour, which,
well, when I saw it, I didn't know it was by 3 directors. I wasn't even in LA. I was like when it first came to DVD,
right?
And I just randomly rented it and really liked it. But I remember when it hit the black comedy, I was quite shocked for a few minutes because I was like, wait, what's happening? And then as it got me, it kind of actually made me deeper into the film.
That's what made me fall in love with it.
It's like a deeper
that tonal shit, because I'm like, oh man, this movie's got everything.
Yeah. I mean, we, admittedly, I'm not sure we knew what we had when we were making that, know. And I think, Southbound probably exists more between, it's probably between VHS and The Signal in that sense. So.
Definitely in the production, because unlike VHS, where it's meant to kind of look cheap, Southbound doesn't. Southbound is a really nice, polished looking movie. It's like really aesthetically quite, attractive to me. Like, it's because it feels Southwestern. It feels like the ultimate South by Southwest movie. Actually, it just looks like it's from that aesthetic of that
I think it's the anamorphic lenses, which I was terrified of. In a low budget movie,
wide.
It's like if you're going to put that wide lens, to work, we really have to do the work and make sure we're creating images that can kind of support that. But yet, no, I mean, I think it was just as a collaborative process. I think for me coming out of Signal, and I think everybody, a lot of the filmmakers on Southbound, we'd worked together already on VHS, so we had a common rapport, and we definitely get in a room and tear into these things and see where we would end up. I think we definitely were able to talk it to the point where I think we got closer towards something that's consistent, not just in the way the pieces are glued together, but I think that there are some tonal similarities that kind of draw the whole thing together. And a big part of that was just chasing the same theme. So once, when you're all spitballing ideas and going, I kind of want to do something like this, I kind of want to do something like that, and we sort of landed on the idea that all of us seemed to be channeling guilt and remorse as the anxiety that was going to motivate these things, that was all predicated on a sin that the protagonist had committed. And I think driving it towards a thematic similarity created, a lot of the cohesion that happens on screen.
I.e. Southbound, as in they're headed southbound.
Yeah.
In case
in case it's not clear.
In case it's not clear, which it honestly wasn't when I first saw the title. It's just, it's set in the South,
I mean, there have been some better title suggestions. Susan Burke has felt for a long time very strongly that we should call it Purgastories.
She's good in it, too. She's really funny.
And I had a very late night argument with Jacob Gentry, who swears to this day that if we had only called it GPS, like G/P/S, that that would have
sold it on that merit.
Yeah.
Well, I actually years ago I said, there has to be a haunted GPS movie now because we've done every other device, and it will probably still happen, haunted Uber or some shit.
Yeah, it's coming.
So now that the studios know you're only capable of segment directing,
correct?
Now that is out there, no, but I mean, I know somebody said this about you once. Somebody I won't say, they were like that you are in a lot of big studio meetings. Like you really have been. I don't know if that's true, but what can you reveal about that process? Because that's tough. Because I imagine that it's probably kind of frustrating when you're always up for big things. Mm-hmm. That's kind of, you probably crave wanting to make more things like this, just to be doing it.
Actually, I want to go back a tiny bit because we've had Jacob Gentry on the show. AJ is a big friend of ours. He's been on several times. So now that it's been almost 10 years since The Signal came out, in retrospect, because that was a big surprising. This is your first movie with your friends. It premieres at Sundance. And I guess there's a level of expectation of all right, what's next, or what's the learning curve when it comes to this? So what position are you in after The Signal? I mean, were you anxious to, were you getting offered things like quote unquote remakes, or were you anxious to try to do something of your own original or outside the genre? Where were you at that point?
Definitely wasn't getting offers coming out of The Signal. I don't think they knew what to do with us. I mean, that was the first time I got to do the water tour, as they say, and took a few meetings in Hollywood. But I was living in Atlanta, where we made it. And I think it was just, for me, it was such a shock to my system because I've been doing theater in Atlanta and been doing short films in Atlanta. And we had just had I was just interested in the medium. I think it took me a long time to come around to the idea that I could be a professional filmmaker. I think for a while I kept looking for some strange artistic avenue, that I could find sort of related to it. And, we made that movie thinking we were going to sell it to foreign because we had a foreign distributor that was interested. And it was going to be a practice movie that nobody would ever see. So when it got into Sundance, we thought, when's the other shoe going to drop? Like there's got to be something dark and humorous here that's looming in the background. And, courting Hollywood a little bit, I think I retracted. I think I kind of, crawled back into a place where I could try and write my own stuff. And I did a lot of writing for a period of time. I teamed up with this guy, Nick Tukoski in Atlanta. He's a good friend of mine and a great writer. And we tried to write a bunch of scripts. I hadn't done the thing yet where, I didn't have the pile of failed drafts, that are full of wisdom and cool ideas, but are maybe the engine of the drama doesn't work. Maybe you don't really understand how to structure a story completely. You can read the McKee or something like that and follow the beats, and there's still no spirit to it. And so, we had to go write a bunch of stuff and kind of fail at it. And I was kind of lost in the mix with that for a few years. I did a few other shorts in Atlanta. I did some doc work. I had a production company there. I just, continued to make stuff. And I imagined I would come back around to a solo indie feature. And we had one that we were in the process of writing when I got the call for VHS. And I thought that would just be something, again, quick, down and dirty that we would go do.
Was the story already there for your segment of VHS? Or did
No,
you do it?
no. It was Jacob had actually recommended me. So I think Ty West had suggested Jacob, and I think Jacob couldn't do it because he was DGA. And so he said, you should look into Bruckner. And Brad was a fan of my work on The Signal. And so... Nick and I, we came up with a pitch really fast and we threw it to them. And then I think just seeing all the people that were involved and knowing what it was. And I was also really excited about found footage, actually. I think I've been a little bit of a hater, like a lot of folks. But if I was really honest with myself, I had to admit that I love immersion. As smart as I want to be about movies sometimes, I still just want the movie to trick me that it's real. Like I'm actually still just trying to get back to that place where I can feel it.
Well, and I'd also say that it actually does suit the anthology format the best. Like really, because it's short and they can come up with different ways of using it. It's like when you're getting to 90 minutes with one effect that maybe didn't work. It feels contrived by the end, you know?
Yeah. You don't have to you don't have to come up with a conceit that carries you all the way to the end. And, and it just, it was a no-brainer. And we also had I thought was a really great idea. I just thought come no one's connected internet pornography to the found footage wave? Like it's such a pervasive force in the world, and you have all these amateur photographers out doing things, and it's something nobody really wants to talk about. And part of my job is to get under people's skin and to sort of pull the things to the surface that are maybe make us uncomfortable. So I think once we had that conceit, we felt very strongly that the piece would work, and we were just relentless to the VHS producers. We just started making the movie. We just kept sending them, diagrams of how it would work and all this stuff.
Oh, before you had been kind of greenlit.
Yeah, until they wired us the money and said, okay, fine.
Yeah. And were they pretty cheap? I mean, in general, those you don't have to say price, but were all the segments still pretty low budget?
Extremely low budget.
That's
I mean, I think we ended up putting our own money into it. And but at the time too in Atlanta, I just had like a wonderful crew of creatives around me that were just down to do stuff. And so, we shot it in 5 days and posted it very fast, and then that's how it went down. But I hadn't even seen the whole movie till it premiered at Sundance, so I didn't even know what we had. I knew we were doing this really, really abrasive kind of, bro, Girls Gone Wild culture, that was something that we were satirizing on some level. And it wasn't until I saw the whole movie together that I realized that, okay, everybody was kind of on several different levels working on that. And
also I think some of the critics get it wrong when they go, because when all the stories are about misogyny, I think people mislabel something misogynistic, and it happens in horror more than anywhere, obviously. Sure. But I want people to tackle topics like that. And I think you have it's the same thing that's happening to Tarantino with Hateful Eight. It's like just because his characters are talking about something doesn't mean the man is got an agenda of that. It's just interesting.
I think we're going through some really, really huge transitions right now. And I think it's particularly, I think the internet fuels that, and I think that it's a good thing ultimately. But people see a lot of things in these movies because they make you feel bad. Yeah, that's part of the point. So how you interpret that sensation and whether or not you credit the filmmaker for the sensation, it's either. The only thing that is tricky to me is oftentimes, people may assume that the filmmakers don't know what they're doing or they don't know what they're provoking in a sense. And I know, particularly with VHS, these were conversations we had on set in a really very particular way. I gave it to female writers that I knew. I was like, am I okay? I mean, where are we at with this? Like, let's talk about it. And, it was definitely something that we went into, whether or not it remains offensive to somebody. It's that's all part of their experience, and that's certainly a valid interpretation of it. But it was definitely something that we were aware of. And
did you have any hand in a friend of mine's one of the ones who wrote Ben Collins wrote the feature length Siren, which is being directed
I was
by
ask you about that.
Greg Bishop, who did one of the parts of VHS 3. Is that right?
Yeah.
The Magician one, right?
Yeah.
And did you have any hand in the early development of the idea of that becoming a feature early on?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to direct it for a long time. I met Ben and Luke. We were the same manager, and we just instantly gravitated towards one another. They'd written a couple really great scripts.
And fellow Georgians.
Yeah, fellow Georgians.
We went to SCAD together, yeah.
Oh, yeah? I know you went to SCAD. They were fantastic. They have a certain, not only are they just extremely apt as screenwriters, but come up with some really strange stuff.
They actually have voice. I think that's what it
Yeah.
is. Like even in the dialogue, I hear something in the ones I've read that were like just more interesting than a lot of other people's writing.
They got together, and we got Nick, who worked on the original with me, and we all just kind of got it down and dirty into all our ugly male places and talked about things that we were afraid of and didn't want to admit, and where all that stuff kind of existed, and then what the joke of the movie was. And I think one of the things they brought to it, and Greg has brought to it, is an ability to do some of the stuff, like explore some of the same thematic stuff from the short, but at the same time manage it with characters that you can live with for 3 acts, which is something that the short didn't have to do. It can just be, mean and dirty and do what it has to do, and you're done with it, and it feels nasty in that way. But for the feature, it's like you gotta, on some level, be able to get behind these guys, and so it's very different. It's a different story.
But it's that that same character is what we're following.
She's even different.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I mean, we sort of saw it as a prompt, like where would you go next? Like what else would this entail? And
cool.
No,
I'm really interested.
Is the film already?
It's in the can, I think.
It's in
but that's
post.
all I know.
Yeah,
post.
it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. It's if it we'll see where it lands, where the destination is. But I think if it ends up on TV, if it ends up on Chiller Network, it's going to be one of the weirdest TV horror movies anyone's ever seen. Like,
Oh, is that who made it? Was it Chiller?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Wow.
Well, Fessenden's was pretty weird with the big fish. He made the film last year with what was that called? Beneath, with these giant
2
killer
years
fish.
ago
And
now.
you're like, wow, this is a strange fucking movie, but it's fun,
Yeah, and they all get releases from Scream Factory, so at least they get a good disc version.
Yeah.
One of the things I respect about you is how I don't know how to word this, how you approach the material. You always approach anything you're about to do with a lot of intellect and thought about, all right, how do we do this? I don't even, have we met over the years? I think we met once briefly.
I think we've been in the room probably many, many times.
Okay, but I don't know if we've actually met, but there was one period we spent a lot of time talking on the phone because you were going to do an Amityville Horror movie.
Yeah.
And I'm originally from Long Island, and I live near where Amityville Horror happened. And
Is this after the Ryan Reynolds?
Yes, and I'm sad to admit that I've seen every Amityville Horror movie, and you, I don't think you had at the time where you were like, who knows about Amityville Horror and who's seen all the movies? And I think it was Gentry that's like, just talk to Rob G. He's your guy, whatever. But I was impressed with the questions you asked and how you're really trying to approach that. I don't know. I mean, can we talk a little bit about Amityville Horror, just in general?
I don't know. Sure.
I liked your approach to it. Is all right. So you get something that's sort of based in truth, right? But then there's a franchise, and there's kind of this expectation. And I think the thing I told you is look, if you hear the word Amityville, you just think haunted house.
Yeah.
So fuck everything that's been done before. I was like, you can do anything you want as long as there's a haunted house involved in it, because that's what the average person thinks of.
Even time travel.
Nobody, time travel, a haunted mirror. If you're David Naughton, I mean, there's so many different things. So maybe not just Amityville, but what's the first thing you think about when you attach yourself to a project? What's the most important thing? Breaking down the story. What do you think puts you in the mindset to be like, all right, this is the next thing I have to direct?
Money.
That is absolutely
Paycheck.
part of it. Independent film is not yet a living. I think I've become, to your point earlier, just getting in rooms in Hollywood and stuff like that. I've definitely become more careful not to go for something if I don't have an idea for it that I feel very strongly about that I think is cool. And because I've definitely ended up in situations where I was just trying to get some things in the mix, and you sort of, maybe you get a hold of a script that already exists, or a concept that somebody's working on. You get kind of into a conversation with an idea that is maybe predicated on some things that you don't think will work, but you start putting off okay, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to have a way to do this that I can get behind, because I don't think I'm good at this unless I have a really clear idea of how it functions and why it's scary, and usually why it's funny. So I found that being in the position where I don't have a provocative answer to those questions is a really stressful place for me. It's a terrifying place because you can try to appease several different producers, forces that be. You can, maybe the bureaucratic layer cake of a studio. There's a lot of forces built around, particularly an existing franchise. And, at the end of the day, you may find that you're coming up with something that kind of keeps everybody moving and gets the thing across the line. But if it doesn't work for an audience, if it's not accepted, everybody's going to scatter, and you're the one left holding the ball as a filmmaker. And then you don't get to play again, so because every movie you make is the last movie you ever get to make. So.
And I imagine development for big franchise stuff takes a lot of your time, whether it gets made or not. I imagine that's taking you out for a year or whatever it is.
That's part of what I feel like I've learned a lot over the last few years is just how to take control of my time, because there are maybe some things that I got a hold of that some big carrots that for me, were worth chasing for a moment, that were hard to say no to. But at the end of the day, it's a year and a half of your life, giving notes on scripts, coming up with concepts. You're very, very involved. And the whole time you're pitching, it's basically a prolonged period of it's a giant job interview that goes for an extended period of time.
Are you being paid in any of that period?
Occasionally there are like development fees, but they're pretty nominal. Yeah, usually
that's just crazy, isn't it? I mean,
I mean, if you're writing it, we got to draft an Amityville movie, so then it works out really well. And but it's a challenging thing to kind of just figure out. Okay, what do I want to go for? If you want to go for studio movies, it's arguable that's all you're doing, at least at my level, where I've done a few, weird anthology flicks where it's I don't necessarily have the torque in that environment to really move things across the line. And I'm still learning, like the landscape of Hollywood. I only moved here a year and a half ago, so for me it's still a bizarre, weird alien world. I'm not sure how it functions, but I'm told the palm trees are not indigenous, but
it's true.
This is the desert, right? This is not a tropical, this is not a paradise. But yeah, no, I mean, I think, to answer your question, Rob, I mean, I just, until we have an idea, until we have something that, just a vision for it, something that we can lock into. Usually it's a combination of an image or something that's really, really scary, or a take on it that's unique. But I think too, what's the engine of the drama? Like what moves the story forward? Like what's kind of the basic driving force behind it? Like what's the dramatic question? Because the biggest thing I'm afraid of is making a boring movie.
Yeah.
And
Billy Wilder said that's the only sin, right? I think that's the only sin is being boring,
Yeah, it's just, and I think attention spans are getting so pinched right now. I get bored. It's hard for me to invest 2 hours in a movie that I don't already know the characters, or it's not an update on an existing myth. So
there's those walkouts at Sundance this year. There was, a lot of Twitter or whatever would say, people are walking out 20 minutes in, and I was thinking about that. It seems ludicrous to me, but then I'm like, but you know what? It kind of directly correlates with how you watch Netflix now, which is if in 20 minutes it didn't grab you, you flick it, because you will not invest an hour and a half when you have Netflix, because it's all fucking free. It's just there. It's just all these movies lined up.
Some people, but
that's how it feels.
If you're in a theater,
I don't know,
an audience.
No, but you're talking about the same
I'm sticking
concept.
to the end.
But when you're at Sundance, I'm just saying I'm not the person who would do that. But if you're there, it's the same thing, because there's 5 things playing at once, and there's all these parties and all this. I can imagine. I kind of get it, and I don't think it's a good thing, but I think it really does reflect how we take in material now.
Well, and I think you have to account for the fact that most people are going to see your movie right next to like BuzzFeed clickbait.
Yeah.
So at any given time, there's this weird, a dopamine rush that they can just click over to. If they're bored for half a second, they can bail on your movie. No one's committed to watch the entire thing through and through. And I mean, that's inevitably going to change the medium. That's going to change the things that stay for an audience, and it changes the way we make movies, because you're fighting for their attention every single second.
And scale is such a big part of it. I was trying to show a class, The Man with No Name, the first one, for a fistful of dollars, and I realized it was on like a pretty big TV, like bigger than the one in this room, and I just realized this was a total waste of time, because this is not what this movie is. If you go from a close-up of a guy's, if you go from a wide landscape to a close-up of his face, on a TV, it's actually more or less the same shot. And on a theater, it's the impact of the scale is what hits you. And you're like, fuck. So it's almost like and this could be why we're in a golden age of TV, besides great writers. It could be because it also suits that language, television filmic language, more than filmic language, if you know what I mean, in terms of scale. And that bums me out, because I worry that people then start making movies with that in mind. Like, let's make it, knowing it's going to Netflix. So we don't need to, let's not have wide shots. Let's not have, anamorphic lenses. And you're just like, oh, fuck. And then the language is becomes nothing.
I'm so relieved that TVs are getting bigger, so
Yeah,
that
yeah,
doesn't
yeah.
happen.
Rob's house just doesn't make it.
I know. He's like, I'll come over.
His
and watch
house
whatever.
is huge. He lives in a TV, a giant fucking TV.
I just installed a projector, so I have a 100-inch in the living, and the couch is so close to it that the viewing experience is sometimes better than when I go to the movies, which is
that's the key. Is the
blasphemy,
distance between your couch and your actual screen that makes it feel like it's cinematic. To piggybacking on that, when you did you think differently as a director in terms of when you did VHS as opposed to your segment for Southbound, because VHS is found footage and stuff, so meaning like most people were probably going to see it on video. It was intended to be that kind of format where it's just seen on a TV, whereas Southbound to me sounds a little bit more cinematic. So I mean, did you change your directing style knowing that what the final product, how it's most likely going to be seen?
I wish I was that calculating. I don't. Yeah, I think with VHS, I just was trying to figure out how to make a found footage movie.
Right.
The biggest challenge of that was just how do I, at the last 13 minutes of that short play is one take, and there's probably 100 cuts in it. And the terror of that is how do I control pace? If that's what we're doing, I'm going to get locked in one shot, and then I've got practical effects and visual effects and all these different things, different locations. So, you're hiding a bunch of cuts. But no, Southbound was very liberating because I'd been in development for years on movies. I'd written scripts. I'd done a lot of story work that had never seen light of day, but I hadn't directed in a minute. And I felt, like I said, I think I mentioned earlier, I was a little bit nervous when all the other filmmakers agreed that we ought to do this anamorphic, because I thought, oh damn, we're making a movie. Like there's got to be scale to this thing. Like I'd never shot anamorphic. Like I got to step up to this a little bit. I got to think about how to use it. So I think for that it was. Again, the great thing about these smaller movies, these anthologies, is that I think while you're making it, at least me, I don't really have any illusions that it's going to get out there. It's kind of always this sort of sad thing where it's like, all right, well, this is it. This is the last movie I ever get to make, so I'm going to make what I want to make and live with it. So it's always kind of a pleasant surprise when people respond to it and get to see it. So I made it as though it was a movie you would see in the theater. I think if anything, we aimed for that TIFF midnight audience. Like we wanted to make a midnight movie.
Is that where it premiered?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
The thing it has in common, as far as I can tell, is like just a sense of urgency. Both films, I feel like they move, they have urgency. You have to. The internal ticking clock of both pieces is really strong, but particularly strong. To me, this is like even a leap. You know what I mean? Southbound. I think that story is really strong.
It's fun with a short film because you just don't have to set much up. It's go, problem, begin. There's urgency from
and
the
it can
top.
be simple. I mean, that's the other thing. Unlike a full feature, you can have these parts, and it can be pretty simple what you're trying to get across, but it has to be done well, executed. It's really cool.
Also, I think in Southbound, part of that was we were all having a lot of conversations about the placement of each of these shorts in the overall film. So even though it's a collection of anthology shorts, we wanted it to feel like 3 acts. So Radio Silence does this great leader that can be very mysterious and throw a lot of stuff at you and a lot of questions, and then Roxanne's piece comes in and it's very much like a proper act one. It's a slow burn. You get to know these characters. There's intrigue, there's mystery, there's build to it, there's a sense of atmosphere. And by the time you come out of that around the 32-minute mark, you're ready for the movie to go. And so I think that inspired to a large degree the fact that the way it begins, with the traffic accident.
Yeah, hers is really cool. I actually also really liked, I think you would dig it because it's like 3 girls from a rock band are on tour, and it's just something endearing about the characters. It's a little more surreal, the setup and the characters, and different kind of pace to it. But
I find that it's
it.
surprisingly dark and uncomfortable to me when you get to the end of it. And because Roxanne doesn't, when you talk to her about it, there's no hint that she's actually going to scare you. She doesn't lean into those things so much because she was thinking so much about the characters and she was talking about that a lot. But when it gets towards the final parts and that, I think it's because of the setup and I think it's because of kind of what's happening to her and her friends. It is very uncomfortable.
I think it's a good theater film. I hope people see it in theaters as much as they can, But while we're on the anthologies, because I have no idea if you're even an anthology guy in terms of like the stuff you watch. Did you study anthologies when you were thinking about VHS to see what kind of works in that short format?
Not really. Yeah. I mean, I grew up on the Creepshow movies and stuff,
Yeah.
and Cat's Eye for some reason was one
We talked
that I
about it
wrote.
last week.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Which one did you like in Cat's Eye?
I mean, as a kid, the
James
Troll
Wood?
one really
Troll,
stood
as
out.
a kid, yeah.
As an adult,
It
that was easily my least favorite. I just watched it last week. I was like, that one's not very good. But the other,
But that's what stood out to me as a kid. Yeah.
But I haven't seen it in a long time. But upon reflection, that there's isn't there a really dark section about a guy who's trying to quit smoking,
James
and he's
Woods,
like, yeah,
Quitters
James
Inc.
Woods ends up on a ledge outside a building.
No,
and-
that's the second story. So
Okay.
James Woods is one, and then that's a gangster on a ledge is the other story. But yeah, that I like the gangster one. I thought it was just fun, you know. But this weird. We were talking about that one. It was weird because you have this kid's story at the end. It's a kid's film.
Yeah.
And then the other two are, so you could never show it to a kid because the other two are talking about raping like the guy's wife. And you're like, who the fuck is this audience? Like, who is the audience for this movie? Very
Well, as a little
schizophrenic.
kid, I
you
caught
know?
the last third, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. And
Yeah, it's so weird.
It probably that whole section probably just went over my
Yeah,
head.
yeah,
I
we
didn't
probably-
understand what I was watching.
Yeah, it's very strange.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's go back to the beginning in terms of your love of film. I mean, we always we grew up on the VHS generation and going to the video store and oogling at box covers and things like that. When did what were some of the early horror movies that actually had an impact on you and scared you and kind of opened you up to that world?
I think I wasn't a huge film nerd as a kid. I mean, as much as anybody, but I didn't identify as that necessarily. But I obviously had my collection of VHS tapes that were usually recorded off the television, and so it's kind of like the movies you end up with are the movies that you end up watching over and over. So it's like, I mean, obviously Terminator and a lot of James Cameron, but also like James Belushi's K9 was in there. I don't know why that one was strangely foundational, but no, there were a few movies that stood out. I think I just was very vulnerable to horror as a kid. So I being at my grandmother's house one day and Poltergeist came on TV, and I was like, I'm going to watch a movie. And my grandmother said, that's a very scary movie. And then she left me alone on a Sunday afternoon to watch Poltergeist, and I had real problems as a result of that movie. Like, it was very, very, very traumatic for me. When I saw Cronenberg's Fly movie, I mean, I couldn't watch a Jeff Goldblum movie for like 10 years after that. Like, seriously, even Jurassic Park, and I was, at that point, I was, a teenager or something, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, I was in high school. And still, I just couldn't look at him. Ever since I'd seen his ear fall off in that one scene, and there's like the weird, uncomfortable fat cell kind of texture that they created underneath it. It was just a strange detail that I couldn't let go of. So I just found them very, very upsetting. But I think for me, it was Cameron, Spielberg. The basics were really the most kind of formative for me. Were the things that I really loved, and I kept going back to. And then I went to college, and I thought, I was not into genre films for a minute and looking into other things or whatever, and ended up in the theater, ended up doing a lot of theater. And after college, I connected to a theater company in Atlanta. It was kind of like a workshop theater. The idea was that they invite an audience in on the process at a certain point. They're not really determined to put butts in seats, so you just kind of come here to try things, and if it works, cool, and if it doesn't, cool. And it's all kind of like about the basic dynamics of drama. And so I think it was there when we were doing like Pinter and Frederick Schiller and all this stuff that was really opening up for me possibilities of what could be done. And Gentry was in that circle, and Dan Bush was in that circle, and I started having a lot of fun putting that back into genre films in our shorts and stuff like that. And just it felt like we were kind of getting back to the roots of what inspired us as a kid. So it was fun to do, all these complex, dramatic exchanges on stage that are sort of academic, and elevate themselves in a different place, and then to go throw blood on the walls at night and go, it's the same thing. It's exactly the same thing fundamentally. But yeah.
Now, were they integral meeting those guys to making the first shorts, like the first thing, or had you already shown some interest in film itself? Because when you're doing theater, when was the actual first like short film where you're like, yeah, actually this medium might suit my ideas?
I was doing shorts. I did a couple in high school, and then I did a few things in college, and that's how Gentry and I met. Like he was the other guy at the University of Georgia that was making stuff, and I think we actually started working together because for a minute the two of us were acting, and we just wanted somebody that we could act for. We wanted to get on the other side of the camera.
Was AJ around then at that school?
AJ was around. I didn't get to know AJ until till after college. That's when I got really tight with AJ and Poitras and Ben Lovett and a lot of those kids. But yeah, and there was this small renaissance, I think, for us right after UGA when we all moved down to Atlanta and got a creative space, and we were just making things all the time. We were making shorts constantly. A lot of chamber dramas, a lot of movies that kind of maybe lean towards what some people would describe as mumblecore, but we had no context for it. It was just
it didn't have a name yet.
Just people like in a room dealing with stuff that we understood, and the movie's over when somebody walks out the door.
Isn't it funny that realistic drama of what the people was kind of, as soon as it had a label, it became a negative thing. But like, if you really think about it, it's no different than like Italian neorealism, just that group of people, like, 20-something slackers dating and getting high or whatever. It's a shame I think it was a bummer once it kind of got labeled as a negative thing in a way.
Is mumblecore like a pejorative thing?
I think it was at a certain point. I mean, I might be wrong, but it felt like, I remember when Swanberg's first film came out, and then Bajowski had a really good film, his first one, I can't remember what it's called, shot in black and white on film, and it was a really great movie, and I was just really excited when I discovered those, because the stuff I was doing in New Zealand very similar, maybe not as funny as the American stuff, and then all of a sudden it was like a negative. I think it was when they started saying they're like navel gazing movies where nothing's happening, everyone's just hanging out and kind of mumbling through it, and then I think the idea of mumblecore, like you couldn't hear the dialogue, I think that was kind of the negative that everyone went on to big things, it seems.
Sure.
A lot of it. But I was always bummed by that, because I actually really enjoyed, and I think it actually did a lot for horror. Yeah, I know some people don't like what it brought into horror. I think if we include Ty's movies in that, it's integral to where I think independent horror went. Making characters kind of feel real, grounding it. I mean, if you look at '90s horror movies, which is when I lost interest, for a long decade, where I probably wasn't really as into horror until maybe The Descent and House of the Devil.
Yeah, House of the Devil.
They're the two that kind of just inserted me. But it's because I think, it's fucking Sarah Michelle Gellar and Jennifer Love Hewitt. It's like, it's not I hate watching it. Of course I like watching them, look at them. But they're all there's not a single real person in like 8 years of filmmaking. Like there's nothing to ground the drama.
The dark 90s.
Yeah, I know.
Although I kind of appreciate the aesthetic now.
I probably would enjoy it a lot more now.
I don't know why. Like now looking back, because it's been 20 years, whatever. You go watch all the post-Scream movies, and you're like, it's a lot better than I remember.
Like Cherry Falls or whatever.
Cherry Falls is great. I actually like that one a lot. But like Valentine,
yeah. I mean, I didn't mind watching them. They just didn't. You were like, so it was all the same. It was like one long movie, one long Scream. You know what I mean? Yeah. But I think what you're that grounding in drama and somewhat realism, if that's what you want to call it.
It's weird. One of the things, again, to go back to this theater stuff, I mean, one of the things that we learned there, we had a really great artistic director at the theater that we worked at, and he opened up a lot of things to us. One of the things that we kind of learned to remember there is that to make it real is the most vague direction you can ever give anybody. And but at the same time, I want it to be real. It's like you want to feel it again for the first time in a sense. That's one of the weird things found footage did is even though it was, locked into this awkward conceit and there were all these like weird cliches that would emerge, is that you could take existing tropes that you'd been done with for a long time and you could kind of see them again for the first time. It's like it could reinvigorate you in a way.
Yeah, I mean that's that's the challenge of that format, because there's not a lot that we love. I think we did an episode on found footage at one point. But the stuff that works really, really works.
Yeah, like Wreck.
Stuff like Wreck, exactly. I still love Cloverfield. I think that was like kind of a brilliant execution of, and they don't cheat at all. It's like it's under his backstory. It's like the tape rewinds to what was underneath it or whatever. So I thought that was really impressive.
It's also one of the shakiest of the found footage movies. Yeah. It's like they really modulated it after that.
And also it's one of the few that we all saw in theaters. Like everyone got to see that in a theater versus even Wreck, maybe had a little theatrical, but really most people are seeing found footage at home. Yeah. You know what I mean? Which is cool. Did you have other found footage films that you appreciated?
I really loved Last Exorcism. Before we did VHS, I went back and watched Blair Witch again, and I just thought it was amazing. It was fantastic. Wreck's great, obviously. I think, I'd have to think about it. There were definitely some that I really, really enjoyed. There was something else. If I remember it, I'll come back to it.
Have you seen anything recently in found footage, or do you think we talk about something running its course. I think it could run its course, and then it could reemerge at some point. But I do feel like after watching The Last Paranormal Activity, I definitely felt like, I can't imagine anyone even making one for a while. Somebody will because it's cheaper to make a film, but it didn't feel like it was likely that many more would pop up right now.
I thought that long shot in Willow Creek was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I talked about it when it came out. I didn't really like the movie, but what is it, like 20 minutes long or something?
It's absurd, yeah.
It's pretty darn impressive. Yeah. Like that impressed me, and I actually did. I watched it late at night. I had all the lights off. I got genuinely creeped out hearing the sounds kind of around me and stuff like that. And sometimes that's almost the worthwhile thing. Like if they can pull off some trick you haven't seen before, or it leaves you wondering how did they do that, then sometimes I feel it's worthwhile. At least with that movie, that's how I felt.
I think it'll come back around in some form or another. I mean, I feel like The Bay stands out to me. I don't know if you guys saw The Bay. I
love that one. I never saw it.
Bekah loves it. Yeah, who made that one? It's
Levinson, I think.
Levinson. Yeah.
It's more of a mixed media format. It's not really found footage in a sense that you're finding tapes, but it's just this collage of all these, all this media that's catching this kind of grand public event, sort of edited together for your enjoyment, and it's very, very effective. But I think that District 9, End of Watch, I thought
End of Watch was really strong.
Me too.
In the use of found footage.
I think some kind of hybrid relationship with that is going to definitely come back around. And I mean, you even see it in The Martian or something like that. Where he's got these video blogs that he's always referring to. But I think what we'll probably get away from for quite a while will be the single conceit that the tapes were discovered.
Yeah.
I have two questions for you before we tackle our topic, because I asked you if you wanted something to riff on. And you mentioned three things that were like French extremism. We've never talked about that. Well, number one, I mean, I'm always curious. So after you guys did The Signal, and I've only heard little bits and pieces from some of the other guys, did you guys talk at all about a Signal 2, either sequel or just another project working together, or was that because it's kind of like it's a relationship. It's almost like getting married or whatever. It's like, all right, do we do this again where the three of us direct another movie? Is that what everyone expects of us? Or do we try to kind of tread our own ground? So essentially, did you guys talk about either doing a Signal 2 or another picture together?
We worked on a Signal 2 movie for a while. In fact, it was something we came back to periodically over the years. And at one point there was something of a draft. And then years later, there was something of a different version of the draft, because one of the drafts that we worked on picked up literally the moment that the movie ended. So the very last frame of the last film, that's where we started. And with that one, we met new characters that were going. It went back in time, and we met new characters from the moment the signal broke, and their journey ended up intermingling with moments from the first movie. So there's literally a moment in the second movie where you have two characters. There's a father and a son, and the father is very signalized, and he tells the son, he says, "Take a knee, buddy." And he's trying to teach him how to survive in this new world, and he says, "Look at these two guys over here," and he points, way across the fray, out in the city in the morning, kind of in the morning light, and he's like, "Look at these two guys," and you see these two guys running across the bridge, and it's Ben and Clark from the first movie, and which we just thought was so fun, and it was a way to get the other characters back into it, and. And I think Clark had a really big part in that version of the sequel and stuff. So it was something we wanted to get off the ground. We still go back to it quite a bit because we feel like the central conceit is really still hasn't been explored, and there's so many different possibilities, especially once you kind of dig into how you represent the different forms of insanity, as a result of this frequency going out, because it's this, this mass broadcast that sort of drives everybody crazy in their own version of insanity. And so you can have a lot of fun with that as far as, cutting from one perspective to the next. Everybody's got a different version of what's going on.
Hey, that sounds like a TV show to me.
Yeah.
Town of Terminus, all stuff happening all over the place.
It also reminded me, like when we met a while back, I remember you talking about Videodrome a bit, and your interest in Cronenberg. Is that still something you draw from, or was that Signal and at all inspired by Cronenberg's work?
I don't know if it was directly so much as just you kind of look back and you go, Cronenberg, like as we get into the French extreme thing, I mean, I think a lot of Cronenberg's movies are movies that I haven't seen a ton, but they stick with you. Yeah. You find that they influence you in strange ways, and that there's an odd psychology to how you get to violence and how you depict that, and obviously the weird blend of technology and how that affects. It's more of I think for me, it's more of a tactile thing. It's the vibe of it. It's dipping into the body horror, and how I think body horror has definitely been something that I don't know if I had dreams about that stuff because I had dreams about that stuff, or if I had dreams about that stuff because Cronenberg made those movies and I saw them when I was young. So
he kind of makes ideas you can actually touch, which is pretty rare. Like usually, if somebody takes a cerebral idea for a movie, it's just up here and you never really feel it. But he'll take the cerebral idea and then make it something that you can tangibly place inside you, or it's something you have to fist, or you have to fuck it, or you have to eat it, and you realize, oh, that's really interesting. That's where he goes from bringing a cerebral filmmaker to actually like you said, a tactile filmmaker. And I think that's why his film. When I saw Videodrome as a kid, I didn't get it at all. I was like, what is this thing I'm watching? And I have it's probably all going over your head, and then you watch it later and you go, oh my god, this is 15 years ahead of its time. It's fascinating.
I like the idea that it's working on you before you have kind of an academic understanding before you can translate it into all these terms and all this language that we use to describe it. I think just as a kid, you're just very confused. There is just a huge collision of these different forces in front of you.
You're just like, James Woods has a vagina. What the hell?
Like, I'm strangely aroused, but I'm terrified. I just want to run out of the room. Like, what's happening to me right now?
Well, this guy admitted on the show previously that you saw Dead Ringers before you dated women. And you were really...
No, I mean, I think I was like 8 or 9. And I mean, it just fucked me up. I was like, what's the extra hole? First date. Like, I just look at the girl, what's the extra hole? Where's the sack?
I must confess, I've never seen Dead Ringers. But the fact that what's the extra hole is the best thing in the world to hear and have no context for.
It's Jeremy Irons playing his twin brother, and are they gynecologists? Is that
they're twin gynecologists.
So if you can imagine a Cronenberg movie where Jeremy Irons is a twin and they're gynecologists, let your imagination run wild.
Yeah, and young boys.
Imagine seeing that at 8 years old before you know what to do with
and
women.
also before porn. I mean, I don't want to say before porn, but Playboy and stuff existed, but like before the where it's everywhere. So you just the idea is like, maybe I assume women have breasts, but that's it. It's like a Barbie doll, I assume. There's nothing else happening here, right? I don't know. But it really
porn, that's like before Christ. I mean, it's like a giant. There should be a cultural
BP.
line.
It's the BP.
The BP
in the times of BP.
Was this before BP
porn.
that you understood this?
After porn.
Hashtag before porn.
It is. Yeah, because I couldn't tell you how kids would grow up now. You know what I mean? I really wonder how they do.
God.
It's
the internet.
I think I was in a library. I think I was in a public library once, and I turned around, this little like 10-year-old was just on a hardcore site, and you're like, no, you're in a library, a public library. It's just.
See, I think that's a little too intense for a 10-year-old because it's like when you're 12 and you get just a glimpse at a Playboy magazine, you're like, oh, what's that?
Yeah.
Like, imagine just having access to the most fucked up, demented shit right off the bat.
It's not good for a person.
Yeah,
that's for sure. But neither was Cronenberg. He is bad for you. Cronenberg is bad for you when you're too young. I mean, I'm glad I didn't see like Shivers at that age because I think Shivers is like now older. It's almost one of my favorites of his movies. At my age now, I just think everything about it's so fascinating. But yeah, young, that film would have been like, why are they doing this?
I saw Crash.
A
little too young.
Oh, man.
Too. Yeah, I didn't quite understand what was happening, but I think
he fucks a scar.
Yeah, well, and I think I had the idea as though it's almost like he does this, and I didn't realize how literal the movie was. I was making up a different story in my head.
Yeah,
Crash is.
But to be that provocative for that long, like in your career, to make that many movies, and each one when it comes out, maybe until recently, can touch a nerve. And different nerves a lot of the time. Like I remember Crash, just people in the audience were like, "Oh my god!" Like at certain moments. Funnily enough, I think it was actually the homosexual scene that most people were most shocked by, and it's probably because they weren't built up as actual gay lovers. But it's still, you look back and going, "Hey, that's something." He's really still finding a way to get to people. It's difficult to do. I mean, I don't know about recently. Lately, I feel like some of the work. The ideas are interesting, but I think he's almost becoming too novelistic or something weird. I don't know. I don't know if you saw his last couple of movies.
I didn't. I think History of Violence and Eastern Promises were really the last ones I really recall.
I like them a lot. There's things about them that I like a lot.
Yeah.
So, all right. So my last question before we tackle our topic, and you probably know it's coming. So me and Elric are going to riff, and whatever you can comment on, if you're allowed to, you can join in. But obviously, you were attached to Friday the 13th for a long time.
Don't say anything, right. Jason. Don't say anything. Sounds funny, Jason. Don't say anything. Just blink.
But there were you were quoted in Fangoria promoting Southbound about what you would have done with Friday the 13th, and Elric and I talk about this all the time because we love the original movies. We watch them all the time. Our argument is they're thinking too much about it. Like, don't overthink a Friday. We'll take almost anything.
Make one a year for the next 10 years. Make directors, just up and coming directors, do them. Have no expectations. Give them $2 million and see what happens. That's how.
So you're inside the room. Tell us what are we?
What do they want? What does the world want from this? If you're allowed to say that.
Let's see.
Wait. First off, who owns this now? Is it still Paramount or Platinum Dunes or both?
I'm so confused by the way those things crisscross at this point.
Okay, so
it's a little bit of both, and there are often different time limits on it. So I'm really not an authority on it at a certain point. But I would say, first of all, sometimes I think you have to work your way back around to something simple, especially when there's a lot of ideas in the room. Because you can get very carried away with a very, very specific take when you're trying to come up with a reason why this should exist again. And I think going down that path, you can end up with something that kind of misses the mark in the sense there was always a desire to get it back to the core fundamental rhythm that works.
Before you say what that is, can you tell us how you got in that room? Like to whether you pitched or they asked you. I'm just fascinated.
Yeah, how did you become
these
the
are
guy?
the biggest kind of horror tent poles that we could come up with.
I think, I went in because the president of Paramount, former president of Paramount, was very interested in found footage, and he'd overseen, had a very active role in the paranormal movies, and this was making a lot of money for the studio, and it was definitely an interesting conversation. I think after VHS, several of us that had participated in that movie found ourselves in a lot of rooms talking about what would become of found footage, like where would it go. We weren't necessarily experts on it. We just made a found footage movie, and I think I ended up in a room talking about the reasons I'm drawn to it and why it works. And I think that he and a few of the other parties just responded to my take on it. So I ended up developing a different movie with them that was found footage for a while. Throughout that process, you never really know if that movie's going to get across the line. But we dove into that one, and, somewhere in the middle of that, I started getting whispers of Friday the 13th. Maybe this is something. What's this going to be like? And
you mean somebody had already come up with the idea that it could have been a found footage thing? That Friday could be.
I think they were exploring it. I mean, I think that they didn't know.
Yeah.
I think they bring people in the room and they go, "What do you think? Is this possible? Are we crazy? What's going on?" And I was in Alabama on a shoot, just like a cast shoot, doing some things, and I kind of got a call that was, you got to come, you got to go be in this room. And it's covered. I think Atlanta at the time I was living there was just iced over. It was one of these like blizzards. There were two of them that completely destroyed Atlanta. And I was like, I can't. I'm stuck in Alabama. And they were like, you need to get on a plane. Like, we'll put you on a plane today. So I left my car there and just abandoned the shoot and jumped in the plane, flew over. Suddenly I'm in a room and they're going, what do you think? What's the deal with this? And so I think, I was skeptical.
About it being a found footage thing,
sure,
or about
certainly.
you being able to do Jason?
Certainly. No, I was very drawn to the idea of Jason. I also knew that's it's like having a tiger by the tail. Like that's a big deal. There's a lot of cultural heft behind that. There's a lot of responsibility behind it, and it's, I think for a director in particular, you have to be careful because you could end up in a situation where you're not making the movie that you really believe in, or you could just get it wrong in a really, really big way. And, again, you want to make sure you have an idea about it. So, I got involved in that conversation, and it was a slow-moving process towards an attachment. It was more of a fluid kind of a deal. But we were just talking possibilities, talking how do you do it, what would work, and how would we approach it. And I think what I mentioned to Fangoria, it really shakes up the structure of a slasher movie if you're going to have a camera perspective on it. And I think it's really risky. I mean, just to the horror community and even to myself as a fan. I mean, how dare you found footage my Jason Voorhees? Like, this
I don't know. I'm not kind of, that's part I was kind of open to, weirdly enough, because again, something different, Jason's always jumped into something different.
Yeah.
That franchise is always pushing you to another different place. And if it had failed, then who cares? Next time Jason will come back.
The pastiche is part of its charm in a lot of ways. And so I feel like, or the fact that I love how they just kept coming up with an excuse to keep it going. So,
what's the VHS segment in VHS 1, which is kind of like a Jason? It's a slasher by the lake.
Glenn McQuaid's Tuesday the 17th.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I feel like that's the closest we've seen to found footage and a slasher.
Yeah. No, it could be interesting. Before you even walk into the room to give these ideas, like what did Friday the 13th mean to you as just a movie goer and fan? I mean, were you fans of the movies? Do you remember seeing them as a kid? And then how did that change once you get the potential gig? Because then you go back and watch them and all, and you look at them with different eyes.
Totally. I mean, my first movie in high school was basically Friday the 13th riff, like many other folks. I mean, I was in ninth grade. I borrowed my neighbor's VHS camera, and it was me and 5 of my friends running from a mass killer in the woods. It was called Mortal Bloodshed. It was terrible. It was edited in camera. In the middle of it, there's a break classically in the VHS where tape where part of the my sister's birthday party pops up for a second, which is
awesome.
Kind of terrifying in its own way.
Yeah, I like it.
So it was foundational to me in like every single way. I was always if you had found me in a room talking about 80s slashers or something, I would always have made the argument that Freddy was a little bit more interesting to me, but that's because I'm just obsessed with it.
I don't even know if he's a slasher. I always feel that way about him. He becomes one, but in the first one, he's so much more than just slashing people. He's killing them in dreams. It's so supernatural and different that it's.
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely prefer Nightmare, the first Nightmare, over all of them as an idea. But Jason is the more consistently interesting, even though they're simple. Because some of the sequels of Freddy, I still just, I don't know.
Yeah, it's the thing. Freddy's got the more ambitious ideas. There's a lot of interesting things going on, but when you look at the franchise as a whole, their track record isn't as great. Yeah. Whereas like Friday's a pretty level track record all the way through. It's like you pretty much get what you're asking, what you're paying for. They're all pretty good.
Well, I mean, yeah.
I like almost all of them.
Towards the end.
Except for 8. But that's me.
Except for 8.
Yeah. 8 but then, somebody like Graham Skipper will fight me over part 8. Everybody's
got
their own
This is
taste.
true. When you look at rankings, it is pretty amazing to see how people are just totally all over the spectrum when they rank those movies.
And rarely does anyone pick the first one as the best movie, which that's one of the only, like usually every franchise is like, the first one's the best and the rest kind of suck or whatever.
Yeah,
but
you're right.
Friday is the one franchise where I've never heard anyone go, the first one's the best by far. It's always like, no, I love part 4, man. 4 is the best. No, 6 is the best one.
Yeah, which did you like? I mean, which are the ones that you actually thought work and kept you interested, not just...
I mean, even though it's not the tone that I would take on, 6 has got to be the most precious to me. It's just hilarious. I mean, that's the moment where they codified it really for me. I like supernatural Jason. I like that he can't die. I think maybe my favorite moment of the whole franchise is the end of 3. I feel like that's the most tonally perfect version of Jason. Particularly the dream sequence at the end where he's still alive and he's looking outside the window. Like, I think the image of him there is the perfect vision of a nightmare character that will just follow you down. I was never. I think going back and watching it, I felt less precious about the mythology in a way. I thought part of the charm of the series again was the way they just band-aided reasons to continue making it. I thought that to treat the backstory of how this all came together without being somewhat flexible was for me maybe to miss the point. And it's not to change something that we cherish necessarily, but I felt like you could codify it further. You could get it simpler. Basically, we had to work our way around a simple. I'm being very vague.
He's
obviously.
being vague, and I'm going to break it down to people right now. David Bruckner's Friday the 13th movie was going to take place. It was going to be found footage. It was going to be an extension of the Part 3 rapey Jason. It was going to go into that dream, that flashback that was never explained. Did Jason try to rape that girl? And it was all going to be about that. And I think fans were going to really embrace you for that, because fans want Jason to be a dark rapist, because that's what the fans need.
That's what you think.
Oh,
wow.
God. Anyway. Do you have any feelings about Part 3 and the weird fantasy she has? This is my only question to guess now.
I don't.
No, I don't think I ever questioned those moments too much. I mean, I think, again, for me, it didn't linger. I was able to sort of...
You're lying.
See, but that's what I love about that franchise is because they came out so quickly, like one a year or whatever it was. They didn't take the mythology serious, but it was just like, where did we leave off the last one? All right, great. He gets out of the barn, we're off. You know?
You can almost hear the pitch.
Yeah, it's like, wait, he's dead, he's buried. Dig him up. He gets struck by lightning. Here we go. You know.
Yeah,
I kind of wish it's like that's. I don't know if it's Platinum Dunes or whoever, but it's kind of like I wish they would stop thinking so much about it and just do that, where it's like, where do we leave off? All right, well, whatever. It just gets back, and that's that. Let's get back to the basics.
Yeah, I mean, what happens as much as you can tell us, because it's not to exploit you, I think, because most people listening to this will never get into this kind of a room. Once you're attached officially and you start working on this thing, what are the things that kind of impede it and get in the way? Is it just that there are so many creative or so many voices that are trying to vie for what the film will be, or is it budgetary?
I think once it strayed from found footage and became a proper reboot, there were
was that from your pitch or from?
My pitch was more about an approach to Jason, than anything else, and it kind of worked in different formats. So once the found footage mandate kind of fell off, we were given a lot of freedom at that point to make the movie that we wanted to make. And one of the things that was great about exploring found footage is that we never would have gotten into a conversation about, can we do this in the 80s, if it, at one point had not been a conversation about found footage. So for some of these things to fall off for a minute there, to have a proper 80s reboot, which I liked because you kind of got to, you were able to, if it was 80s, you could pay your nostalgic debt in tone and vibe and in location, and you wouldn't necessarily have to regurgitate a lot of slasher archetypes, which I always felt like any movie that you make these days, if it's a horror movie, it's got to be surprising. Again, we can't. I don't know that I there's value to homage, but in a horror film, it almost works against how scary the movie can be. In a sense, the movie has to kind of violate your expectations. And
That's
I always
why
thought
we don't see a lot of slashers right now.
I think if with something like Friday the 13th, if Jason is scary again, all is forgiven.
Yeah.
If you can give that, especially to the hardcore fans, and for myself, if I can be scared of it again, I think that was always what we were aiming towards. But yeah, what was your question?
Well, I guess at what point you're going along your train, you're gathering momentum, you're working on a thing. What gets in the way of that as you go with these studio? Because a lot of them, like the same thing happened to Halloween. In fact, I think the guests were on our show and couldn't say anything, and the next day that was off the track. They were about to do Halloween. So what happens along the way, unless it's too personal, but what happens to projects like this?
It's definitely not personal.
Directions?
I mean, I think, the Platinum Dunes guys were, Brad and Drew were great, actually. They gave us a lot of freedom. They listened to us. The executives at Paramount listened to us. I think everybody wanted us to go and figure out what we were going to figure out. I thought we actually had a lot of great support behind what we were doing. They asked good questions. I think with something like this, what ultimately roadblocks the thing is really just bureaucracy. It's a studio. It's a giant corporation. There's a lot of interests sort of outside of the room that I'm in, whether they be marketing or whether they be market related, that ultimately kind of influenced our take. And when it couldn't be something that I had worked on and that I could work on, I think it kind of went the way it went.
And Jason the Snow. No, I'm not necessarily your pitch, but do you think that's a cool idea?
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Everyone loves Jason the Snow.
It's amazing. I don't think you can come out of the gate with a new Friday the 13th movie and just put it in the snow.
Yeah.
But I think you can get to that.
What if the camp, it's winter, the camp's been closed for a long time,
You really want that.
Developers come, they want to turn it into some fancy, beachfront property.
You should read the Jason versus Leatherface comic book that Topps Comics did in the 90s.
All right.
It's pretty awesome. It was something like that where developers came in and mucked him up and brought him to Texas.
These are all familiar plot lines, by the way. These are all things that
you
come
must have
up.
heard like everything.
Yeah.
Right? Everything.
I'm just, before we move on, the last thing is I know they're doing a show right now and that they're pretty far along in it. Was that ever, did that ever even crisscross with you guys? Like, hey, this is what they're doing on the TV side of thing, or completely separate
I was
entities?
pretty close to out the door when that came about, and really didn't have any influence over the work that we had been doing. To what degree that was a concern for them putting out a new movie, there's, that's, again, outside of the room that I'm in, who's making decisions on account of that. So I have no idea. I have no idea what that's going to be.
What'd you learn from that process for that particular one? I know because you'd already gone through maybe a similar process with Amityville, like doing the big tent pole, you're working on it for a long time. Like, what did it teach you that you have to do for yourself?
The big lesson and the reason I take a lot of this from my peers, like Jacob Gentry and, Ty and Wingard, and just, watching them put out movies. They're very prolific, and they just go for it. It's just, you really have to balance those kinds of opportunities against the possibility of making your own movies. Yeah. Because you can do all the great work in the world, but there is nothing more dissatisfying than not seeing it come to life. I would rather do something smaller that I could bring to life and that I could see, to its fruition. I'm only here for so long. You only get to make a few movies, and every movie's the last movie. So, it was in the midst of developing Friday that I got to do Southbound. So that was it was such an invigorating, awesome experience to be developing a few things. And in a lot of ways, Southbound was the solution, was the thing that we got to go do on the side to kind of keep us alive and interested in the game. And, for me, that's been what's gotten across the line, has been these quick little things that we go do kind of despite the larger goals. And so there's lessons for me professionally.
Wow, but how does it influence you on the big scale? Like if Hellraiser Hellraiser already happened, but the next one just calls you the next day and goes, oh good, you're done with them, come play with us. Do you have to get more reserved about that, or do you have to just see if you fall in love with the idea again and then chase it?
I would be suspect. Yeah. And not, again, I think everybody has the best intentions. I think everybody's trying to make movies. 90% of the people I've met in Hollywood are love movies, and they're trying to make the best movie they can. Nobody wants to put out a shitty movie. Nobody wants to stand by that. They want the prestige that comes that if you're making genre movies, you do want to please the fans. and it's maybe harder to do that than it looks at times. But it's about. I think the judgment is more towards the system and the fact that it's harder to put movies out these days, which is just a fact. Fewer and fewer movies are getting made, and it's you really have to balance that, I think, as an artist and figure out what you want to do.
I do want to ask one last thing, not about that, but about contemporary stuff before we go into the French stuff, which is just I'm curious of your peers and filmmakers, contemporary, just because you're a contemporary filmmaker too. Like, what's turning you on in the genre now? Like, from It Follows to whatever. What have you seen in the last couple of years that you're excited by?
I mean, I love Wheatley's stuff.
Yeah,
I'm troubled by it in a good way.
Killist.
Killist is great. It's I love the way it moves. I love the way it changes shape. I love the audacity of what it is. I love how prolific he is and his attitude about the movies, from what I can tell. And I really enjoyed High Rise. Like, he really stands out. I mean, It Follows obviously is incredible. It Follows one of the first movies that scared me in a long time.
Yeah.
I thought it was miraculous. I think for me, I always, again, I just want to get dream language into movies. I want to get nightmares on screen, but it's tough because nightmares by design are not dramatic. So there's a reason, when somebody calls you up and goes, I had a dream last night, you go, oh, shit. You're about to hear something really boring, because there's no useful information in what they're going to explain for your life. It's just a bunch of symbolic metaphors that tool around in their problems. So it's not necessarily interesting. So there's a tricky balance to get the spirit of that into a movie. I thought It Follows did that better than anything I'd seen in a long time. Like, it is the stuff of nightmares. Like, it is so perplexing and weird what's happening, and yet completely grounded and terrifying despite all the strange nostalgic happenings. But that was a big one. Common stuff, I think. Obviously, I think Ex Machina is a horror film.
Yeah,
I think it's a pretty extraordinary horror film.
Yeah.
Cool.
What now? Why?
You pass.
Why did we pass? We'll delve into this topic, but why was this what you wanted us to talk about? Is there a specific reason, or are you a huge fan of the French stuff, or did you have questions for us?
I think my big question was just, why do I like this?
Yeah,
like, maybe you guys can shed some light, because for me it was really the pivotal moment with the extreme thing was Inside.
Yeah.
Which
I've only seen. I own it. I've only seen it once. I have never been brave enough to watch it again, and that's how I feel about a lot of these French movies. There's that one little pocket, kind of in the mid 2000s, where they were just coming fast and furious, and they were really mean and nasty movies. And
there's a difference, because they weren't just in the horror, and I think that's what made them so interesting. They didn't even start with their horror films. They started in their like dramas, in the French dramas that were being made. It was like suddenly they had these dark strands that are borderline horror films, and then the guys who actually wanted to make horror films took the art house drama trappings and put them in a horror film. So suddenly the lines, I think, were being blurred in their cinema. I mean, I was definitely, my entry point was their art house. Like, even Irreversible or whatever, it's seeing those things on screen going, well, really, it's a drama art house thing, but then it's so dark. So maybe it's the idea of erasing the boundary of what is a horror film and what is just a drama, and that's scary. You know what I mean? Like, your girlfriend goes down a dark alley and is, something awful happens to her that's terrifying and you can't undo time. Or, I think it's definitely a blurring of a line.
Yeah. Well, I remember getting into that, that I don't want to call it a trend, but that section where all of a sudden the French stuff was kind of really prominent in the horror scene. The one I remember was High Tension, and it was long before Lionsgate put it out here in America. Like, me and my friends are total nerds, so we're reading up on what's going on in the world all the time anyway. And I think my friend Jay had gotten, I want to say, an import, because it had been out already overseas for quite a while. So we got it really, really early, like before there was buzz about it. And he's like, you have to see this fucking movie. And it was like, we called like 5 friends up. We all came over. We watched it. And I was really blown away by the style, Alex Hodges' style. It wasn't that over-the-top gore a la Peter Jackson where you laugh at it. Like, this was over-the-top gore where you're like, holy shit, that's...
That you felt.
You felt, yeah,
and I don't think the same is true for Torture Porn. I would watch a Hostel and I wouldn't feel it. I'd see them being tortured and be like, I don't want to watch that. But I never was like, ooh.
Yeah.
And I remember the opening of that film where they kill everyone in the family, and I think they slide a chest of drawers or something in the dad's head. I remember feeling that going, like, it's almost shattering.
Yeah.
which is
No,
exciting.
so High Tension was the first one that's like, whoa, what the hell is going on here? And, the ending, I don't want to be spoilerish for people that haven't seen it yet, but you should see it. There is a twist ending. People love it, hate it, whatever.
You know who came up with the twist ending?
What's that?
You know it wasn't Aja's.
No, who came up with the ending?
What's his name? The guy who made Leon, the professional.
Luc Besson?
Yeah, it's a Besson. Yeah, that was a Besson.
Really?
Besson produced it, and it's a Besson note, and it was a note they had to take. but they made the best of it. They made it work and for what the net. But it was. I just thought that was interesting because it gives it. But it does give it a fantastical, more of a fantasy element. And when you just started this whole thing, it was funny to me. You just said, "Yeah, I wonder why I like this," and it was like your previous line had been you wanted to kind of get dreams and unrelenting. There's a few words. I'm like, well, it's basically all of those things.
Because we figured it out.
Because they do have a dreamy quality. The violence has an unrelenting quality. You never can escape these films the way they're set up. Usually, they just unfold. They don't seem very typical 3-act, like in lots of different location and story. It feels like once the story starts, you're in it and then it ends.
What was the first one that really caught your attention from that kind of?
I mean, I was a huge fan of Irreversible, you know, but that movie's strange because for all the hell it puts you through, it really ends in this very spiritual way.
It says 2001, right?
It's almost like, okay, you just brought me through hell. You just scrubbed my brain, beat the hell out of me, left me for dead. There's everything is nihilistic, and now you're going to give me this like beautiful thing to kind of ponder on about this, life that could happen in creation stuff. And I found that I was more receptive to that idea just because I'd been left in such a dark place previously, and I thought the combination of those two things, just on an emotional level, was really interesting. But Inside was the first time that I judged it. Inside was the first time that I don't like. I find torture porn in the same way as like mumblecore is tough for me as a phrase. Like anytime you sort of, anytime somebody comes in and says, okay, you can't do that kind of thing, inside the horror genre, I just resistant to that in general. But when I watched Inside, I was on a production shoot. I was already in kind of a dark place. I was by myself for several days, and out of town. And I watched this movie. And halfway through the film, there's one act of violence that I thought was so unforgiving and so incredibly dark and just so nihilistic, and I felt so manipulated that I turned the movie off, and I thought, fuck you, just how can you, why would you do this? I'm done with this. I'm over it. And then it lingered, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And 2 days later, I went back and I finished the movie, and the final image of that film is maybe one of the most amazing, effective, just visions of horror and hell that I have ever witnessed. Like it is, I don't know how to describe it except that it's a dark place that I know exists somewhere, and I feel like I got to witness it, and it became one of my favorite horror films in the last few years. And
perfect double feature with the Irreversible.
Yeah.
Bekah should have watched them both tonight, and she'd have the baby tomorrow.
But like you, Rob, I don't watch these movies a lot. I'm not like, hey guys, let's pop in Martyrs tonight. Like, it would be a blast.
I think they're almost all for me solo, besides Irreversible.
Every single one you're mentioning, including Irreversible, one shot deal.
I love Martyrs. Like, who would rewatch Martyrs?
I've seen it once. I think it's absolutely brilliant. I think it's one of the most.
But I never want to see it again.
I never want to see it again.
It's so rare that I say, but when I see a horror film, like that's actually shocking. Like I'm actually shocked by what you showed me. That film, Martyrs, hit that for me.
Yeah.
And so I like the idea that an American remade. I mean, it might be great. I don't know the person who made it, but I would never. I probably would never watch it because I don't need to. Yeah. Somebody showed me this thing that's very special and unique and ugly.
It's interesting because we talk about Haneke a little bit as being sort of a similar thing where, these are movies that are very arresting, very difficult to get through, but they stick with you in a way. And I remember them more than anything else that I've seen. I mean, the act of violence in the middle of Cachet. Yeah. I like it too. Sometimes these movies, it's not frontiers. It's not something that you dive into this kind of darkness for the entire film, but it's one act. It's one thing that happens in the middle of the movie that is so shocking and upsetting that you almost can't go back to that movie in a sense. And the way that it resonates, I think, has a particular effect. And I've just been drawn to that. I think Trouble Every Day is another one.
Yeah, that's a really underseen in America, I think, because it never had a really good release here. And I saw it in theaters in New Zealand when it played at like the film festival. I know you went there. Did you go for the film festival? Was that when you were in New Zealand? When you went to New Zealand?
Yeah,
it was. And Trouble. And I remember seeing it and going, I also because I'd seen a lot of her other films, but that was so different. The horror parts worked really well, and then the other parts were like a different movie, but somehow the Tender Six score and everything just kind of Vincent Gallo and that's very strange. Something about it sticks. I feel like a lot of these films linger in your mind more after they end than the act of watching them. Because not everything's answered. I mean, especially a movie like that. Part of you wonder, is there even a supernatural element, or is it in my head. Is she a vampire? What is she? You know.
It's also that movie spends so much time developing these characters and building you into lulling you into a different state of mind that I remember watching it and going, okay, so I'm told this is French Extremity, and that's why I'm watching it. It's just something I saw fairly recently, and you're watching this movie, you're going, how can this movie possibly go there? Like, how can I actually get into this before the end of the film? And then it does, and it's completely effective in that sense. I feel like the question that I'm always asking myself is just how are we depicting violence in a way that we're more comfortable with in the States, or just what's more acceptable as a horror film? Like, how shocked do we want to be? How much do we want to conjure, all the negative emotions that you experience in a horror film? And what is the, what is it to sort of taste something that crosses those boundaries for you? And, for me personally, it's not necessarily political or something. It's not that it has to make a point other than I'm going to feel it to that degree, and do I want to confront that? Am I open? It's kind of like hot sauce.
And think about violence, because violence is this awful thing. Like, in real life, if we really went through any of these stories, they'd feel awful. It'd be awful. The one I remember, the first one was I Stand Alone, and I read about it in Fangoria and looked it up, couldn't find it for years. Finally saw it before Irreversible, and it made me feel so bad and scared of like desire, because it's got a lot of incestual imagery in it. But the guy's so interesting to watch. Like I can't remember Francois Nonon or whatever for first name. Have you seen this film?
No.
You really should. I think it would still affect you. It's very.
Yeah.
The beautiful thing about it is, I think this is what it does. And maybe all these films do it. They present these awful things, but in such a beautifully shot way. It's nothing cheap about it. So in America, we think of horror films like a lot of the times it's cheap the way they make them. These are not cheap looking movies. These are like, really, actually recently from Europe, The Cub was a similar kind of thing. It had kind of if it was an American film, it would have been a no budget, handheld thing in the forest. But in European, it was filtered through this very gorgeous lens of photography, and I think that's part of it, because it's shot basically like a Kubrick film. It's actually might be the most Kubrickian shot film I've ever seen, and yet what you're watching is this butcher having incestual feelings about his daughter, and he's disgusting to look at, and you can't help but keep watching. And I need to watch it again. I haven't seen it since that screening.
No, you don't.
No, well, you're right. Yeah, I don't.
That's why I've only seen Gasparino's first two movies. I've seen I Stand Alone and I've seen Irreversible. I've yet to see Enter the Void.
It's pretty remarkable.
Which I'm sure is great. But the thing is,
amazing.
I know it's 3 hours long, and I know with him, so far, it's been a one-shot deal every time I see his movie. So it's like, I need to mentally prepare myself for a 3-hour night of...
I also think that might be a big screen-only film.
Yeah, that's definitely...
It was kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah.
As an editing thing.
Yeah.
Like, just there's
I've
edits
seen
in
that opening, the
remarkable.
credit sequence, which I know everyone talks about.
I haven't seen his new film. I have not seen that one.
Love.
I've heard mixed things, but I'm curious. I think he's a really interesting filmmaker. And if it's enough that he made us watch Angst, because Angst is one of the... If you haven't seen Angst, it's
remarkable, yeah.
Austrian, so kind of Haneke. But just that's all you need to know for now. It's unrelenting.
When was it made? Was it early 1980?
I think it's 80 or 81,
80s?
and it's definitely a forefather of all these films. Like, it's one of those ones that would have... it's a little more obvious because he's a serial killer out looking for the next victim kind of film. But the way it makes you feel is very similar to these movies.
Yeah, the way it's shot. It's just it's pretty
gorgeous.
unbelievable.
It's interesting, too, with Haneke, you talk like Funny Games or something, which, again, in the spirit of only ever watching these movies once, I have seen the original Funny Games several times. I haven't seen the American remake because I just don't feel that I need to. Although I'm sure I'm wrong about that. I'm sure the performances add something to it. But
I think you should, and because I'd love to talk to you about how... The problem is it's a direct remake, as in like every word. Mm-hmm. But you know how the first one...
he did it too, right?
He did it. So, but you know how the first one has that like apologetic, like somebody walks into your house, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I dropped you. I'm sorry. But they're coming to get you in a menacing way, but it's like apologetic kind of European. But in America that doesn't exist. Like somebody steps on your property, you get the fuck off my property. Oh, I carry a gun. That kind of... So it didn't feel believable, the setup of it. If you know
that's interesting.
That was the big difference to me.
Because
everything else is good.
One of the things I love about him, because he goes into some meta directions that I know turn a lot of people off and stuff, and even potentially me at times. But I almost feel like, okay, you're so good at the genre stuff that I'm here. I will listen. I will let you deconstruct my experience that's happening here, because you do it so well. In a weird way, you've almost earned it from me.
Yeah.
The golf ball rolling into the door frame in the original Funny Games is such a terrifying moment. That's like such an amazing visual moment, such a great, like, I see some humor in it in a sense, that I'm down. I'm, fine. If you want to rewind the movie, go for it in the middle of it. Like, I will listen to you now. He is maybe the only guy in the world that I think should go and make his own movie shot for shot. I don't need to see it, but it's so exacting, whatever he's manipulating, like, I'm down for it. But I think in the same way, I liken these movies to also endurance films, like 127 Hours or Open Water, or even Jerry, which is almost endurance test and tedium, but it's a terrifying situation. Have you guys seen Jerry? Have you seen the Gus Van Sant
Gus
movie?
Van Sant's Matt Damon and Casey Affleck. It's really cool. Great score. And
it's terrifying, and it's they just wander into the desert and get lost, and it's that simple. But yeah, again, movies that you see once that are very, very troubling, but there's also a sense to all these films that you're kind of self-conscious about what it is that you're seeing and about the fact that you're participating in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that's definitely like an acquired taste, but I'm kind of drawn to the implication of that, again, as opposed to making the violence fun or cheer-worthy all the time. It's something that, challenges you to endure and keep watching. I think that's why Martyrs for me might be the quintessential.
You need to watch. I'm really curious to see what you think of 29 Palms if you watch it. Bruno Dumont made one in America, so he had won Cannes a couple years before. And this is it's like literally when they say slow burn, I mean it's just like slow building dread for 2 hours, and then one of the more shocking endings I've ever seen. And so to get there, the payoff is really interesting. I think 90% of your audience isn't going to get there. They're going to watch 20 minutes, and there's some stuff that might be even seen as pretentious, like people naked it's out in 29 Palms,
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a Russian girl and an American, and he's a location scout, and they go out there, but it's shot like a, European film. Mm-hmm. But it's to me, I actually stand it as one of the best of this entire subgenre to me, and surprising so few people have seen it, because I think it's kind of about the creation of how we can be monsters and that kind of feeling, and I think you might really like it, or it definitely is in that Jerry. If you can get through Jerry, you could get through this,
right,
that kind of thing. But there's a lot because there's so many different directors who aren't horror directors and who make, like Fat Girl for Catherine Breillat. There's like one film they will make. They're art house filmmakers who win Cannes awards, and suddenly they make this one thing that strays into some dark material, and suddenly it's kind of lumped into this idea. But I think it's warranted. I think that it's telling us something about. I don't know enough about France politically in that period to know if it was what it was reflecting. I don't know where they were. I mean, it wasn't like they were in Iraq or It's very curious to me where that comes from. Maybe it comes from a place of abundance and wealth, and the need to shake that up. I don't know.
I think it's interesting that there are riots in the background in both Inside and in Frontiers. I mean, Frontiers is very clearly like
the immigration question and
yeah. Well, I don't know what they were responding to. Yeah, but I know that Frontiers starts where they're evading a riot. You have these criminals that are on the run, and then and then they fall in with this it's the Texas Chainsaw Massacre riff in a lot of ways, and they fall in with this family. This Nazi family that's trying to control them and dominate the female ultimately and impregnate her and indoctrinate her into the family, and she ends up escaping and killing them all to give it away. And then in the very end of the movie, she's hits a roadblock and gets out, and she's been through hell, and the final girl hands herself over to the police. And it's some really dark, really interesting political stuff. Again, it feels like they're responding to right wing.
Oh, it could also be the
maybe it's Bush era
of
stuff.
The EU, like the idea, because these countries had borders at a certain point, and now they don't. Like anyone can move anywhere in Europe. Like once the EU was established, your money and the money was the same in all these countries. So you can move from Germany to France. So a lot of Arab people suddenly live in France. So suddenly you're like, the fear, kind of like just like what Trump is drumming up now. The fear of your not having strong borders maybe was part of that push. I don't know. I'd love to. I'll have to read more about this now because I'm actually curious. There's another one that I know I've never met anyone over here. Sorry, I started at a festival as well called Criminal Lovers. Francois Ozon, who's like way art house. Like it's basically a dark, fucked up Hansel and Gretel story with these two kind of lovers, and they get this gay guy traps them in their basement and starts taking the guy every night and starving them and like feeding. And it's really beautifully shot and has a slightly fairy tale vibe to it. But it's a great movie. There's a lot of movies in there that are just fringe horror, I think that's the closest way we could.
There's another stylistic consistency that I've noticed, which is this weird that the scores in particular between Inside and Martyrs and Frontiers and probably the No stuff as well tends to be very, very ambient and very tragic, and will often accompany these scenes of extreme violence. And there is this there's something very sad about it when it's going down that is an interesting too, and it adds a certain reverence to what's happening. And I don't know if that's the draw for me too, where it seems to kind of beg the question of why are you enduring this? What's the point? And that self-awareness is kind of fun for me.
Do you think you've turned them off before? Have there been movies from that? Not you don't have name them. Same with you, like where you've actually, I don't need to see this. Like I don't need to see that kind of.
Not yet. Believe it or not, I've never. No, I mean, only if it's a bad movie, but I haven't come upon that with like the French stuff at all.
Did you guys see Bazin-Moi? Because I've never seen it, and that's the one that was one of the hot button ones, like right after Irreversible, because it showed scenes of rape. It's the two girls with the guns on the front cover, and they're pointing the guns. It's like black and white. I think they were real prostitutes hired to be the actresses in the role, so the sex could be real or something. But it was like very, two girls like shooting up people, revenge kind of. That was one that was like a big release, and I just for whatever reason never super controversial. I don't know.
No, I've never seen. I'm always curious about them. Ills, which always seemed very Strangers-esque to me, but what
it is, it's very. I mean, not it doesn't have the menace of the Strangers, because it's unseen, almost child size. They're probably young kids, punks, or something. Yeah. But it's got some good dark, shadowy imagery. It's pretty tame compared to a lot of the other.
I was going to say, does it get gorier?
It's almost more. I think the reason it would be if anybody classified it as Extremities, I think it feels tonally similar to a lot of those movies, but it kind of doesn't go there. It feels like
it has a couple like dark. Like I think there's an eyeball scene that got a lot of press at the time.
That's right. Yeah.
Like Zombie or something, but it's. Yeah, I think maybe also because it's about a real, like a married couple and something's really happening to them. They feel real. Maybe that's where it is, but it definitely doesn't touch. When you get to Inside and you're like, oh my God, the viscera that you feel in that film,
Mm-hmm. I remember watching
Scissors, the end, man. Yeah.
I remember watching Inside for the first time with Mike C., the guy that I created Icons of Fright with, and like halfway through, some gory thing happened. He's just like, Rob, when the hell did the French become so Italian? I don't get it. It's like they're kind of because Argento and like the whole Italian thing kind of went overboard with their gore.
And yet they don't let you off the hook.
Is just, yeah.
No, but that's the difference. They don't let you off the hook with the expressionism. So Argento will always have that fantasy to his good work. It's got the colors and the palette's so great to watch and fun in a sense. But like they don't have any of that in these. There's nothing really. There's kind of no escape on a.
They're coupling this extreme violence, and I would say it's Inside maybe pushes the limits a little bit, where it's a little over the top. But a lot of time I feel like it's just slightly outside of the range of something that, despite all the chaos, is kind of believable. But tonally, I feel like. They're coupling it with this kind of malaise. It's almost like there's something existential that's happening
like
alongside
of it. Like you needed the shakeup of violence to appreciate life.
It's almost like the violence turbocharges the hopelessness, or really forces that to land. Like I feel like there's something. Like I said, they're very sad to me. Like listen to the score. Like the score for Inside is just incredible, but it's this slow, sad drone, and the whole movie is against the backdrop of loss because it opens with the car accident. Yeah. The woman loses her husband. She's trying to keep her baby alive, and it's such a strange expression to couple. It's almost like the violence is incidental. It's just a way to get a rise out of you as an audience to say, okay, so someone died, someone's close to you. We're going to hand you the anxiety. You're going to actually get close to all of these troubling feelings, and we're going to use slasher cinema to kind of get you there. And it's not going to be fun. You think it might be fun. It's going to be stylized in a way that's cool and that you can kind of respect, but it's not going to be fun. It's going to be challenging watch.
And as storytellers, I guess you're always trying to remind yourself, oh, go simple. But then you see it done simple, and you realize, like it follows, like simple. Mm-hmm. It's just coming. It's just going to keep coming. And I think Inside, when we talk about the last moments we've been scared in movies, I think there's maybe 30-minute mark, 20-minute mark, whatever. It's just the shadow. She's just standing in darkness, and she's in your house, and it's fucking scary. Like that moment, I remember going, that is such a great moment. And she's a great actress as well. She's been in so many French films. But I found that moment to be, and it's the subtlest thing. Nothing's even happening. She's there. She wants something from you, and it's not good.
What happened to those filmmakers' follow-up? Livid?
Livid I've seen it, and I liked it. I didn't love it. It's a little messier, a little more dreamy. But I never got a release here.
Aren't they doing Chainsaw?
Yeah, they're doing Leatherface. They directed the new
which is cool.
Prequel or whatever it is.
Good way to get me interested in any of these, to be honest. You can give me any sequel or remake as long as somebody who has a voice. It might not come through, but I'm interested, Yeah. But yeah, I don't know what happened here with Livid. I just never got a proper release. Mm-hmm. My favorite of all these movies, and if no one's seen it, this is available on Netflix, not streaming, but I show it to people whenever I can. But it really touches on when you say sad. It is very sad, but it's called In My Skin, and it's a woman, Marina Devan, and she was the writer for like all these bigger kind of French films I was on. She stars in it and directs it. It's from like 2001, so this was like not long after Irreversible. And it is really, she's a cutter. She works in an office, very normal, seemingly normal to everyone. But, when she's alone, you see her cutting, and she has like this, almost this anxiety, like body separation, like her body's not her own. And there's this one surreal moment. She's at a dinner with people, and they're all just talking, and she just looks down, and her arm at the halfway mark just isn't attached to the other part of her arm. It's just perfectly on its own. Oh my God,
that's
with
amazing.
A gap. And the way she looks at it, and then looks at all the people, it's one of those incredible, almost like Buñuel like moments in a movie. It's surreal. And then from where it pushes from that, she she cuts her leg at some point, and you just can't let it heal. She's obsessed by the scar. So it's like real body horror, and it's disturbing. And her performance is so committed. It's one of the saddest things I've ever seen, but also one of the most like when you say, oh, can horror films still affect me? I showed it to a room of people at SCAD, and I remember like everyone walking out going, oh my, like there's walkouts and people like almost wanting to throw up. In the end, it just is so intense. But it's a really good movie, and she's had a couple follow-ups, and neither of them have had that same. She's made a couple things that just feel watered down, and I'm still hoping that she'll make her shorts are really good too. They're on the same disc if you get the disc. Very interesting shorts. So she's a voice that because there's always talk, oh, there's not enough female voice, and I'm like, if there's some out there already who just haven't had a chance to kind of get their film in front of you. They're just unique, and she's definitely one of them. Definitely, if you have the stomach for it, don't get on my case. I've already told you, use words cutter.
Usually these are movies I have to watch alone because you can't really.
yeah. You're gonna share that with, and not on a Friday night.
Probably not. It's not a date
good
movie.
Date flicks. Yeah,
not a date movie. And Bekah wanted us to mention Calvaire, which is actually Belgium. Close enough to France. and he made a movie that was on my list last year, my top 10 favorites of last year, which his follow-up. Oh, he might have made another film. I don't want to say Jesus. What's the one that's like Holy from last year? It's about the honeymoon killers, more or less, but in France. And they're having a relationship. I want to say something Jesus or Alleluia. That's the word.
Alleluia. That's right.
Alleluia. Yeah. And it's very much one of these movies. But actually, really like characters might be at the kind of on the stronger side than some of the other French extremist films. And I think you'd like it.
I haven't seen Serbian film. I'm told it's kind of in the same court. Is it? I mean,
it's
literally. I've heard some things about it that it's difficult for me. I guess the fear is that you're going to watch something that's just trying to provoke you for the sake of provoking.
That one
you,
I felt is a little bit that way.
Yeah.
It's more. I would definitely say it's more like an exploitation film.
Yeah, but it looks really. That's the thing. I was expecting like something down and dirty, but it's shot nice very well. Like it looks like a really good movie. It's been so long since I've seen it.
I kind of want to rewatch it, to be honest.
I kind of do, too,
because I actually fell asleep in the middle, and people are always like, you fell asleep during that? And I woke up right when, like, the worst, most controversial. And I was like, yeah. But, so I love that the guy was arrested. But I just love that there's still people, arresting people for making movies out there. Mm-hmm. God bless them.
Yeah. Wait, I don't know the story.
Oh, well, the film festival program, what's the Spanish festival? The big... The one
Sitges,
yeah. I think the programmer that was arrested for screening the film, and then the filmmaker at some point I think was held too, and actually did jail time like for showing this movie. And then you watch a movie and you go, I mean, I get it, the implications, but it's still not a snuff film. This is not like, what are we even talking about? This is not reality. It's insanity. It's this is all make believe.
Do you feel like that's ever at risk with the general public with these horror films? I mean, I guess the bigger risk is just is it gonna be conservative politically?
I think we just have to keep pushing the boundaries and, of all taste, good taste. I mean, I've always thought John Waters is kind of the hero of that. Even though he's not really a horror director, I feel like he was always the one who knew what's fucking good taste. Like, good taste, what is that? And to be honest, we would only have great movies if we also knew what the other side was, So having a big fat guy eat a piece of dog shit at the end of your movie, maybe that is our boundary, and we go, okay, that's my boundary. I'm out,
Right.
But if no one's pushing it, we wouldn't know,
I have a fear of context, and what I mean by that is like, all these movies that we mentioned, we can watch them, and I'm still rather sensitive. I'm a sensitive horror watcher. That's why I love horror, is because I still feel something out of it. But I get nervous when it comes to really young kids that are getting into horror that aren't getting into the fantastic we grew up at a perfect time where we could see some extreme weird shit like Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer or I Spit on Your Grave, but then we're watching like Terror Vision
Phantasm
and Phantasm, things that had like fantasy elements to it that kind of bridged the gap. But I just fear the generation that grew up on torture porn or whatever.
No budgets, Rob. We can't do fantastic. We got no money. I mean, that's true.
Fantastic, but I mean,
no one does it now.
I'm scared of the younger kid that watches Serbian film or Martyrs and is like, yeah, this whatever. Yeah, and it's like, really, you didn't feel anything because you're supposed to feel some fucked up shit watching that kind of stuff. So I don't know. I mean, that's why.
It's weird, though, because I could almost make the argument, and maybe I'm confused on this front, but that when it is that abrasive and when it does challenge you on that front, it's impossible to fetishize the violence. Now, I mean, maybe that's just me, but that's kind of the weird thing that happens in a weird way. Like, what's more troubling? The fact that we cheer it on, or the fact that it's such a dangerous affront to our viewing experience,
Yeah, if you're affected by one of those films, then it isn't glorifying violence. Like, if you're affected in the negative, like if it's irreversible and you're shocked and horrified, it is not glorifying. Then there's those ones where you're watching something where you could be bored or kind of titillate. Like A Human Centipede, I'm not sure where that fits.
I haven't seen those movies. Again, for this, I just haven't.
It's somewhere
maybe
in between.
I haven't had the guts to watch them.
I think they are satirical. I have to
There's
believe
that level too. Yeah.
I have to believe that they're satirical. Otherwise, there's something really wrong in the world. But and they're kind of funny. But the first two anyway. But there's another part of me that goes, yeah, what's it for? Or even some of the Saw movies. I totally know what you mean. But I do think the ones we're talking about, the ones that have affected us, it's probably, I feel like it's a positive thing. I remember hearing Oliver Stone talk once about when he was making U-Turn, which I loved. As a kid, I just knew I loved that movie, or a teenager. And the one thing he said is, like, I didn't want to make any movies where anyone's murdered anymore, and not make it the most violent thing you could ever see, and the most awful and like painful and like messy. And the death scenes in that are just the murder where they plan a murder. It's just crazy messy and keeps going and going. He's like, that's what it would take to kill this person bigger than you. And he's like, he got so sick of seeing it done in a way. And I think that's kind of almost a responsibility, even though it's a little grandiose,
Sure.
as filmmakers to try to portray something like that.
It's tough because it's taken in so many different ways, and it's like I feel like we're tasked with conjuring an emotion. So we come into a theater and it's like, okay, I want to bring all this negative shit to the surface, like dread, all forms of anxiety, terror, horror, repulsion, revulsion. All these things are going to come up, and part of the point is to feel them. Just to feel these things, so you can kind of walk out of the theater and put yourself back together in whatever the filmmaker, in whatever way the filmmaker wants to leave you, but. I think it's understood in so many different ways at the same time. Like, at what point are you also fear mongering? If you're doing that with Home Invasion, which is a really effective way to conjure an emotion because it's so familiar, it's like, are you then telling everybody they need to be afraid of this stuff? Does it then get into a political situation?
Do you have subgenres like that you can't? Well, I know Rob's particularly. Those get to him, the home invasions.
Yeah. I mean, there's not much that scares me per se, but it's like that. That's one in particular, and that's just because that's a real life fear.
Them will definitely have that.
Yeah, and that's why I've avoided it this whole time because.
Are there any subgenres like that you would maybe avoid or tackle because they disturb you more, or you?
I don't know about a subgenre. I certainly think there's topics that I think would be in really poor taste to explore. I mean, the big obvious one would be, there are certain tropes in horror that you could combine or follow. You could lead yourself down a creative path that you could do something that would call to mind, say, gun violence imagery, school shootings, this kind of thing. Like, you could very easily back into that if you weren't careful. And I mean, I personally feel I don't want to be too certain about this, because who knows, somebody could do something in a way that changes my mind. But like, I feel like it would be, for me, pretty inappropriate to sort of explore that topic in horror, because that's a very complicated issue. That's about media. That's about mental health and guns, and it's like a really traumatic thing that's kind of happening to the whole populace right now. And it's like it's. I just don't think that's the arena that we work.
I'm going to bet my entire farm that you do it. I feel like you're as soon as you say it, put it in the universe. Now you're going to somehow be drawn to go. Now I need to know. Now I need to understand why.
It'd be such a dark place to live in. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, Elephant did it really well. I thought Elephant was,
sure,
in a very non-narrative, very non-character.
But it's not a horror film, very specifically. It's a strange portrait. It's a meditation or something.
I was going to say that episode of American Horror Story, which is the first season, was pretty.
Yeah, it was strong.
It was it was pretty disturbing. But I mean, that was. B.J. Colangelo wrote an article about the way that guns are interpreted in horror films, and her argument, if I'm getting it right, her argument was like, everyone was so upset by that episode of American Horror Story, and it's like, that's how you should feel about those kind of crimes and gun violence. Like we've gotten so used to, because in all the action movies, all the heroes have guns and this and that or whatever. Again, it's a hot topic debate.
Well, also because all we ever hear are numbers when we hear of a shooting.
Yeah.
All you hear is 56, 12, 13, and your brain somehow has to cope to keep living.
Yeah.
And just goes, it's only 12. Or I mean, you never really think like that, but
no, but I mean, in the same regard that Oliver Stone says, let's make violence ugly and awful so that you are repulsed by it, and it kind of could be the same with that.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I guess.
What of all those kind of things? What would you most like? I mean, it could be what you're working on now, but is there something you would just really excited you want to explore? Is it what kind of horror film?
I definitely am interested in doing a survival endurance film. Something that, again, sort of maybe closer to open water, or something that is, again, you watch it once and you kind of never forget it, so it just kind of burns itself into your brain in a sense. But something that's kind of a real test, like a real challenge to the audience, like, could you endure this? That's not necessarily about the violence or the gore so much, but that it's about the endurance. It's about whether or not you can, if you really put yourself in the role of the characters, like, where would it take you, and kind of what are you made of in these circumstances? Who would you become?
There's a hell of a documentary. I don't know if you've saw it, called Touching the Void.
I love it.
Yeah,
one of my favorite movies.
It has a couple of lines in it that just burned in my brain. It feels like he's reaching out, touching the void or God or whatever it is, and it's just, as you talk about survival, I think people would. That's as good as any narrative film I've ever seen, or fiction film.
It's extremely best reenactments perhaps I've ever seen.
You hardly breathe watching it. It's one of those kind of films,
and it's amazing. It's so effective too, because the guys are narrating it, so they make it. Yeah, from the very beginning, that they survive.
Is it K9 or something else? Just to tell Robbie, it's just like a couple climbers get. I mean, I haven't seen it in a long time. Maybe a couple climbers get. They fall down a shaft, like climbing at one of these great frozen mountains, kind of like Everest type things.
I think it's in the Andes.
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but it's it's just two of them, and they go up, and they're on their way down, and they get hit by a snowstorm, and it's pretty terrifying when it happens. Actually, I think one of them. I think they're tied together so they can see each other, and one of them slips off the edge of a cliff. And so he's hanging by the rope, and he's tied to his friend, and his friend can't see him. That's what happens. He breaks his leg. So he's having to lower him down with the rope, and so they're kind of like, they're kind of hopping in front of one another. So one of them will go farther, and then they'll use the rope to lower the other guy down, and then he'll catch up with him. And so he's lowering his friend down, and his friend slips off the edge of a cliff, and they just get stuck, tied to both ends of this rope. One guy's hanging. The other guy's up on the rocks, can't see his friend, doesn't know what the deal is, and he waits for hours and hours and hours, and just runs the whole situation through his mind until finally he comes to the only conclusion here is that I have to cut the rope, and he does, and I won't say any more about it, but anything else about it. But
voiceover is just like amazing.
Yeah,
this is how the story's being told to you, and this is actual voiceover, and you're like,
wow,
mind blowing.
And I just think, okay, so one day you're going to be at some form of that threshold. Like one day every one of us is going to kind of have to face some form of that. It may not be as exciting as a mountain adventure, but
it's called diapers. When you have a baby and you're staring down the abyss itself.
Exactly. And I feel like, again, that question of like, what are you made of? Who would you be in this moment?
It's interesting, and I think that could fit also to normal horror films, like even a Jason film or whatever. The survival element maybe people could go into it deeper into the survival part. How are these characters going? I feel like at a certain point with those tropes, we got too easy. It's just like, oh, they're your final girl, so now you get to run away. It's like, no, let's feel the surviving part. Like, how do you survive? I feel like that could be enriched in a lot of those movies.
Sure, definitely
by you. You have been anointed.
I tried, man. I mean,
Well, I'm looking forward to your Nightmare on Elm Street reboot.
Thank you.
I'm very proud. I'm very happy for you. No rumors here. Congrats. And I like Without Freddy was a great idea. No Freddy, call it Nightmare on Elm Street.
It's just the glove, and it's all from the point of view of the glove.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, it's like we're going to combine a lot of things.
Nice.
Yeah.
With De Palma split diopter shots. Yeah, that sounds good. I'm into it.
Now I'm confused.
Besides Southbound, are you starting to work on something else at the moment, or just kind of put the feelers out?
Yeah, nothing I can really talk about, but it's just because some things in the works, but I'm writing a lot. So Southbound was just so much fun to kind of start from the beginning fresh and just come up with something new. So I'm writing some things that are a little bit left of horror. They definitely have elements of extremity and things like that I'm drawn to, but definitely have a foot in the world of horror, but maybe a little bit more sci-fi, maybe a little bit more survival. But yeah,
all right.
That's what I'm working on.
Well, Southbound is out now in limited theatrical release.
It's really fun.
As of this airing. And then when VOD is in...
On the 9th.
On the 9th.
Yep.
So you can check it out VOD. I know a lot of our listeners check out stuff VOD at this point. So by all means, check it out. Thank you, David, for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys.
I don't know. Maybe Bekah will be a mom again by next
Could be.
episode.
Yeah, we could be.
Place your bets. That's, poll is open. We'll see you then.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.